Let's start everybody. Good evening everyone. सब बढ़िया होने चाहिए. Let's start with a discussion from where we left yesterday. But before we start, there were a few questions that I asked to be answered that I said that I'll answer today because they were asked at the end of the class and I said that it would be better if others also get to know the answers. Questions were quite simple as far as I remember, but the answers I said that we need to know, everybody should know the answer to those questions. चलो किसी को कोई और सवाल भी अगर पूछना है तो यू कैन आस्क इट राइट नाउ, देन वील बिगिन. तो फिर वो थोड़ा सा बीच में अलग से डिस्टर्बेंस हो जाता है. एनी क्वेश्चन विद रिस्पेक्ट टू व्हाटएवर वी हैव डिस्कस्ड, व्हाटएवर वी हैव डन टिल नाउ, और एनी अदर क्वेश्चन इन जनरल, प्लीज आस्क. भरत का सवाल है पहला, कैन यू प्लीज एक्सप्लेन हाउ वुड डेप्रिसिएशन ऑफ रूपी लीड टू एन इंक्रीज इन बॉन्ड यील्ड. इनकी वो वाली क्लासेस हो गई हैं, एक्सटर्नल सेक्टर वाली, एक्सचेंज रेट डिटर्मिनेशन. एक्सचेंज रेट डिटर्मिनेशन कोई सा भी नहीं हुआ अभी. अच्छा चलो कोई बात नहीं, एक्सचेंज रेट डिटर्मिनेशन नहीं हुआ आपकी क्लास में. तो आई जस्ट क्विकली टेल यू व्हाट इज द रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन एक्सचेंज रेट एज इन डेप्रिसिएशन ऑफ रूपी एंड बॉन्ड यील्ड. बहुत आसान है. वैल्यू ऑफ रूपी, वैल्यू ऑफ अ करेंसी. When you value something, you value it in some other unit. You value apples in rupees. याद है इन्फ्लेशन पे हमने डिस्कशन किया था स्टार्टिंग में. एप्पल्स की वैल्यू इन टर्म्स ऑफ बनाना, एप्पल्स की वैल्यू इन टर्म्स ऑफ गोल्ड, एप्पल की वैल्यू इन टर्म्स ऑफ रूपी. When you value something, you value it in terms of something else. When we say value of rupee, or more precisely depreciation or appreciation of rupee, that means you are essentially talking about value of rupee in some other currency, that is, let's say dollars. $1 is equal to 70 rupees. What does it mean? It means that in order to buy $1, think of dollar as any other good, like apples, like water bottle, like mobile phone. Think of dollar like any other good. In order to buy $1, that is this 1 unit of this good dollar, you need to shell out 70 rupees. Tomorrow you have to shell out 80 rupees in order to buy $1. Then you have to shell out 60 rupees in order to buy $1. The price of dollar, that is this particular good, keeps on changing at every moment. If you have to spend 80 rupees to buy $1, you will say that dollar has become costly, or vice versa, rupee has become cheaper. Rupee has depreciated. When price of dollar becomes 60 rupees, you will say dollar has become cheaper than before, or vice versa, rupee has become costlier than before. So this is appreciation, depreciation of a currency, number one. Number two, how does it affect bond yields, or what is its relationship with bond yields? Bond yield matlab kya? Bond yield is the essential effective rate of return that you get on a bond. A bond is a debt instrument. You have paid 100 rupees and on that bond it is written that government will pay you, let's say it's government bond, government will pay you 5% interest rate for next 10 years. You buy that bond for 102 rupees, whereas your return is 5 rupees. 2 रुपए आपने एक्स्ट्रा दिए और रिटर्न आपका है 5 रुपए. You will earn 5 rupees, but you have paid 102 rupees. Therefore, your yield is 3 rupees. Interest इतना मिला है 5 रुपए का, लेकिन effectively interest कितना earn हुआ है 3 रुपए का. That is bond yield. ये भी हम डिस्कस कर चुके हैं. How is bond yield determined, or how does bond yield change? We discussed the relationship between bond yields and interest rates. Speculative demand याद है आपको? We discussed speculative demand, bond yields ऊपर नीचे. Why? Because interest rates change. Interest rates in the economy, that is interest rates apart from this interest rate on bond. Apart from the interest rate on bond, interest rates in the general economy, they change. Bond के ऊपर तो सरकार ने फिक्स कर दिया. सरकार ने बोला that हमने आपको bond पे interest rate 5% देना है. अब bond तो already exist करता है मार्केट में. A bond already exists in the market. Now the interest rates of the market change. A bond already exists which is paying 5% rate of interest, versus now the interest rate has changed to 3%. Bond तो अभी भी 5% दे रहा है, लेकिन अब मार्केट में इंटरेस्ट 3% हो गया है. When market interest rate decreases, then if earlier it was 4 and now it has become 3, therefore this bond will become relatively more attractive than before. याद है speculative demand? मार्केट का इंटरेस्ट रेट 4% था, बॉन्ड पे इंटरेस्ट रेट 5% मिल रहा था. बॉन्ड इज रिलेटिवली अट्रैक्टिव एज कंपेयर टू मार्केट इंटरेस्ट रेट, नंबर वन. Number two, when interest rate in the market now becomes 3%, bond is still being offered at 5%, or the old bond still exists in the market, which is giving you 5%. Now interest rate in the market has reduced to 3%. So relatively, bond has become more attractive than before. Next, when interest rate in the market again rises to 4%, वापस से 4% हो गया interest rate. Now, as compared to previous stage when interest rate was 3%, bond will become relatively less attractive than before. It is more attractive, but relatively less attractive when interest rate was 3%. So interest rate changes ups and downs, and bond becomes relatively attractive or unattractive. When it becomes relatively more attractive, you will pay a premium to buy that bond. When it becomes relatively less attractive, you will pay a discount to buy that bond. You will get that bond at a discount. We have discussed this aspect when we discussed speculative demand. अब हम इन दोनों कॉन्सेप्ट्स को जोड़ने की कोशिश करते हैं, द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ एक्सचेंज रेट्स एंड बॉन्ड प्राइसेस और यील्ड ऑफ द बॉन्ड. गवर्नमेंट बॉन्ड, its price, that is the rate at which government bond would be sold, the price at which government bond would be sold, depends upon many factors. One of the factors of price of government bond is its demand. In how much demand is a government bond? If the economy is doing well, ध्यान से सुनो सब लोग, if the economy is doing well, that means companies in the economy are doing well. When companies in the economy, let's say Reliance Industries is doing well, all other general economy is doing well. When general economy is doing well, then I am the person who has money, and I have to make a choice whether to invest my money in Reliance Industries or in government. I would choose to invest in Reliance Industries because Reliance Industry, even though not as secure as government, but it will give me a better rate of return. मेरे पास अगर 100 रुपए हैं तो मैं सरकार में इन्वेस्ट करने की बजाय, rather than investing my money in government, I will invest those 100 rupees in Reliance Industries. Why? Because Reliance Industries is doing well, or economy is doing well. Hence, if I can earn more interest from the economy by bearing a little bit more risk, government में zero risk है, but by bearing a little bit more risk, I can earn more interest from the economy. I would prefer to put my money in the economy, that is outside the government, let's say in Reliance Industries. So when economy does well, demand of government bond falls. Vice versa, when economy does bad, अब Reliance Industry के failure का chance बढ़ गया है. When Reliance Industries risk increases, risk of me investing money in Reliance Industry increases, then I may choose not to invest in Reliance Industry but in government. सरकार में भले ही कम इंटरेस्ट मिलेगा, कम रिटर्न मिलेगा, लेकिन मेरा कैपिटल सेफ रहेगा सरकार के पास. Government will definitely return that money to me, but if I put it in Reliance Industry, my capital is not safe. So when economy is in general not doing well, investment in government bonds increases. I hope this part is clear to everybody. Investment in government bonds increases, their demand will increase, and therefore their price, hence yield. So government bond की yield depend कर रही है उनके price पे, price depend कर रहा है उनकी demand पे, the demand of government bonds. Now let us link two external economies, two economies which are external to each other, India and US. Demand for government bonds in US will increase if American economy is not doing well. Demand for government bonds in India will increase if Indian economy is not doing well. Simple, हमने अब अमेरिका और इंडिया के अंदर सेम सिनेरियो अप्लाई किया. If American economy is not doing well, demand for government bonds in America will increase. If American economy is doing well, demand for government bonds in America will decrease. People will invest their money in American equities. Same goes with India. अब इन दोनों को लिंक कर देते हैं. Let's link these two economies, Indian and American economy. If American economy is not doing well, then demand for investment in American market, American equities will be less, and people will prefer to invest in American government bonds. अगर अमेरिकन इकोनॉमी अच्छा नहीं परफॉर्म कर रही है, अमेरिकन इकोनॉमी इज नॉट परफॉर्मिंग गुड, देन people will choose to invest in American government bonds rather than in American economy. Because Indian and American economies are now open to each other, therefore an American investor now has one more option, that is they can invest in Indian economy. American economy में invest नहीं कर रहे हैं. अमेरिकन इकोनॉमी में जब इन्वेस्ट नहीं कर रहे थे तब आपके पास एक ही ऑल्टरनेट बचता था कि आपको अमेरिकन गवर्नमेंट में इन्वेस्ट करना है. When you did not have any choice, either you invest in market or you invest in government. Now an American investor has a choice that they can invest in Indian market also. Now they will compare कि Indian economy तो अच्छा कर रही है, Indian economy is doing well, American economy is not doing well. So as an American investor, I have got two options. One, to invest in American government or in Indian market. If Indian market is giving me good returns at low risk, I would invest money in Indian market now. Clear हुई सबको बात? Indian market में पैसा invest होगा because American economy is not doing well. American investor now has two options, rather whether to invest in American government or in Indian market. If Indian market's risk is not too high, American investor may choose to invest their money in Indian markets. Indian and American economy, this is how they are linked to each other. When an American investor invests in India, American investor के पास कौन सी currency है? Do they have rupees? No, they have dollars. American investor has dollars. They will bring dollars to India, but with dollars they cannot invest in Indian market. They will need to convert dollars to rupees in order to invest in Indian market. I hope this is clear to everybody. Dollar है American investor के पास, rupees थोड़ी ना है. To invest that money in India, you will need to convert those dollars to rupees. So an American investor will, number one, bring dollars to India. Number two, convert those dollars into rupees. When they convert those dollars into rupees, what happens? The supply of dollar in India increases. Supply of dollar in India increases, demand of rupee. Why? Because that dollar needs to be converted into rupee. Supply of dollar increases, demand of rupee increases. Hence, rupee will become costlier than before, dollar will become cheaper than before. Exchange rate of India will appreciate or not. पहले कम डॉलर्स थे, अब क्योंकि अमेरिकन ने इंडिया में डॉलर डाल दिए तो नाउ देयर आर मोर नंबर ऑफ डॉलर्स इन इंडिया. सो नाउ अमेरिकन डॉलर विज़-अ-वी इंडियन रूपी विल डेप्रिशिएट और इंडियन रूपी विज़-अ-वी अमेरिकन डॉलर विल एप्रिशिएट. मोर डॉलर्स, सप्लाई डॉलर की बढ़ गई, इंक्रीज डिमांड ऑफ रूपी, देयरफॉर रुपया हो जाएगा महंगा, डॉलर हो जाएगा सस्ता. सो नाउ देयर इज मोर डिमांड ऑफ डॉलर्स. सो दिस लीड्स टू एप्रिसिएशन ऑफ इंडियन करेंसी. This money, American money, which is now converted into rupees, is invested in Indian markets. In Indian market, this money will be invested in Indian equity as well as in Indian government bonds. सरकारी बॉन्ड में भी पैसा इन्वेस्ट होगा और इंडियन मार्केट में भी पैसा इन्वेस्ट होगा. As an American investor, now you have got one full option, either to invest in American government or in Indian government or in Indian market. Some part of this money will be invested in American government, some part in Indian market, some part in Indian government bond market. Versus when American economy starts to do good, if American economy shows signs of improvement or starts to improve, then what will happen? Now the American investor is trying to move out his money from earlier investments back to American market. अगर अमेरिकन इकोनॉमी अच्छा काम करने लगती है, सो एज एन अमेरिकन इन्वेस्टर व्हाट आई विल डू, आई विल नाउ प्रेफर टू इन्वेस्ट माय मनी इन अमेरिकन इक्विटीज, इन अमेरिकन स्टॉक मार्केट, रादर देन इन अमेरिकन गवर्नमेंट और इंडियन गवर्नमेंट और इंडियन मार्केट. आई विल स्टार्ट टू विड्रॉ मनी फ्रॉम अदर एवेन्यूज ऑफ इन्वेस्टमेंट, from American government bond, Indian government bond and Indian equities. I will start to reduce my exposure to these assets. Rather, I will increase my exposure. I will increase my investment in American equities. Therefore, there is going to be withdrawal of American investment from India. When American investment is withdrawn from India, what happens? Demand for dollars increase. Demand for dollars will increase, therefore dollar will become costly. अमेरिकन ने जो इंडिया में रुपीज इन्वेस्ट कर रखे थे, अब वो उन रुपीज को वापस कन्वर्ट करेंगे डॉलर्स में और वापस अपने देश ले जाएंगे इन्वेस्ट करने के लिए. Americans who had invested rupees in India, who brought dollars, converted them into rupees, invested in India. Now they will withdraw these rupees, convert them into dollars and take them out of the country. American investor will now demand dollars from Indian market, convert their rupees from India into dollars and take them back to their country. Demand for a dollar will increase in our country. Demand for dollars increase. What happens to exchange rate? Exchange rate depreciates. Rupee will depreciate. Dollar महंगा, रुपया सस्ता. Demand for dollar has increased, therefore price of dollar depreciates. I hope this is clear to everybody. Exchange rate depreciation हो रहा है, and simultaneously demand for government bonds is going to reduce. Why? Because they are being sold by those investors. This is how bonds, exchange rate and external sector are linked to each other. I hope this clarifies things to you, or at least enables you to answer these questions and visualize these situations. Next, Darshan ka question. This question is from National Income Accounting and Income Determination chapter. We know that national income calculation takes into account the net factor income from abroad, as we get GNP from GDP and then NNP from GNP and finally national income. However, in the chapter on income determination, the NCERT states that without the government imposing indirect taxes and subsidies, the total value of final goods and services produced in the economy, GDP, becomes identical to national income. Resultantly, they go on to refer to GDP and national income interchangeably in the entire chapter. I understand the indirect tax and subsidy removal part, but if only that is removed, should it not be national income is equal to GNP and not national income is equal to GDP, as the NFIA part has not been dealt with? ये भी मैं बताता हूं, बाकी सब लोग प्लीज इस चीज को ध्यान से सुनो. We have done our discussion on national income accounting. In national income accounting, there was one, I think I have told this in the class also, but I would like to clarify it again. The name of the chapter is National Income Accounting. That means accounting for national income, measuring national income. You try to define first what national income is and then you try to measure. देखा था हमने circular flow of income model. Now, national income as used in the name of chapter is used in a general sense. GDP is equal to national income. याद है circular flow of income model था हमारा. Incomes earned by providing factors of production is equal to expenditure done in the economy, which is equal to value of goods produced in the economy. Firms and households, they interact in goods market and interact in product factor market. In goods market, firms provide goods to households and households do expenditure on firms. Firms ने good produce किया, households ने खरीदा. Households ने खरीदा तो expense किया firms पे, तो firms ने goods provide किए और households ने expenditure provide किया. In factor markets, households provide factors of production to the firm for producing goods and firms pay incomes to household in return for these factors of production. Household provide करेंगे land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship और firms इन factor of production के बदले households को देंगी rent, wages, interest and profits. So in factor market, households and firms interact like this. Household provides factor of production and firms make payments for those factor of production. In goods market, firms provide goods and households do expenditure on the firm. We have seen this circular flow of income. And from this circular flow of income model, we discussed that the value of incomes received in this economy, income being defined as factor payments done. Value of incomes received in the economy is equal to value of expenditure done, which is equal to value of goods produced. Value of incomes received, factor payments, is equal to value of expenditure done is equals to value of goods produced. A is equals to B is equals to C. हमने लिखा था एक identity. From this identity, from this model, we find out that incomes are equal to GDP, that is value of production, is equal to expenditure, that is aggregate demand. C plus G plus I plus X minus M. So from this model, we see that incomes are equal to GDP. This is how we have defined incomes matlab factor payments done. GDP matlab value of goods produced. So from our model, incomes are equal to GDP. So we say that GDP is equal to national income. Here, the word national income is used in a generic sense. Incomes earned in a nation or in this economy are equal to GDP of the economy. Here, the word national income is used in a generic sense. In the chapter in NCERT, this term income and GDP is used interchangeably when the word income or national income is used in a generic sense. Next, there is a very specific term which we call as national income. The specific term national income is defined as GNP at factor cost, NNP at factor cost. National income as a specific term is defined as NNP at factor cost. In a generic way, national income is simply your GDP. ये difference है बस. Generic versus specific usage of the word national income. I hope this clarifies things for everybody. नेशनल इनकम को यूज एक जगह जेनेरिक सेंस में किया है और एक जगह स्पेसिफिक सेंस में किया है. शुभम का सवाल है अगला. सर, एज वी चूज प्राइवेटाइजेशन एज इट हैज मोर एफिशिएंसी एंड इफ एफिशिएंसी इंक्रीजेस प्रोडक्शन नीड टू बी इंक्रीज्ड एंड प्रोडक्शन नीड टू इंक्रीज एंड देयरफॉर एम्प्लॉयमेंट डिमांड एंड फाइनली जीडीपी. But why our GDP is not increased by that pace as we expect after 1991? This is the question, I think, Shubham, that I think it was Piyush who had taken out industrial policy wala chapter. I think this question better be posed to him, but because you have asked, I'll answer this question then, even then. Question is, reason for low, essentially your question is, reason for low rate of growth post 1991, or not low exactly, I'm sorry, not the word low, lower than expected. We expected certain higher rate of growth, but the actual rate of growth post 1991 has been low. यही essentially question है आपका. Privatization से efficiency, efficiency से growth, more production. This is essentially the question. Reasons for less than expected growth in the post 1991 period. Now reasons span many factors. We have got political reasons, we have got social reasons, we have got economic reasons, policy making decisions, government आई गई और different type of government and that decision making policy. Reasons will span multiple factors, multiple aspects. But let's try to focus on some of the major reasons why our growth has been less than expected. In fact, I will give you data also. We say there is a growth model, एक हम पढ़ते हैं, growth model, I mean not required for the class. There is a growth model that we study which is Rostov's growth model. आपको please लिखना भी मत, कहीं पे रफ में भी मत लिखना इस चीज को. There is no need for this. Rostov's growth model. तो उसमें रोस्टोव ने ना प्रपोज किया है. रोस्टोव was an economist, sociologist. He proposed different stages of growth. Please don't write it, it is not needed. Just the idea, I'm going to convey the idea, that is more than sufficient. Not needed at all. तो उसमें रोस्टोव की ग्रोथ स्टेजेस को हम बोलते हैं टेक ऑफ स्टेज. टेक ऑफ ऑफ एन इकोनॉमी. Rostov proposes 5 stages of growth of an economy. No need for us to know that. Absolutely no need. Unless your optional requires it to know. Otherwise, no need. There are 5 stages of growth that Rostov proposes, and one of the stage of growth is, the third stage is called the take-off stage. When economy actually takes off, like a plane takes off. When you sit in a plane, first वो हवा भरता है ना अपने अंदर, पहले रनवे पे चलता है थोड़ी देर, फिर उसके बाद हवा भरता है अपने अंदर, उसके बाद फास्ट चलता है एंड फाइनली इट टेक्स ऑफ. सो स्टेजेस, टेक ऑफ मीन्स नाउ द इकोनॉमी इज रेडी फॉर booming, growing at a very fast pace. All the basics have been achieved and now economy has to just take off. Take off stage. Take off कब करेगी economy? When will I'm just introduce the word Rostov so that you know the word take off. When will an economy take off? An economy will be able to take off, or successful takeoff will be achieved only when the basics required for that takeoff have been fulfilled. Simply because you have put the plane on the runway doesn't mean that it is going to take off. It may take off, but it may not achieve the desired altitude. It may take off, but it may not reach the desired destination, which is far away. The reason is that maybe there was an issue in preparation of that. Maybe the quality of plane that you are running, or the driver in the seat, the pilot in the seat, is not competent enough. Maybe the runway was not good, maybe there was not adequate fuel. The point is, basics may not have been right. In order for economy to take off, you need multiple things to fall in one place, in their right place. For example, for economy to function properly, economy to take off, first and foremost, you need administrative reforms. Unless administrative reforms take place, economy will not take off by itself. Unless financial sector reforms take place, economy will not take off by itself. Unless financial inclusion is achieved, industry is able to take decisions in their best interest, you will not be able to achieve takeoff. अगर आपने बोला कि हमने प्राइवेटाइज कर दिया, केवल प्राइवेटाइज करने से ही थोड़ी ना एफिशिएंसी बढ़ जाएगी. Just because you have said that we are ushering in privatization, that doesn't mean the economy will start to take off. The economy will start growing at a very fast pace immediately. No. For an economy to grow at a fast pace, you need to ensure that private sector is, number one, given enough freedom to take decisions. Number two, private sector's dependency on government doesn't pertain to those aspects where government should not be involved. Government can be there in regulations, in permissions, but not excessive regulations and permissions. If I have to set up an industry, I should be able to get land at a reasonable cost. लेकिन अगर लैंड मेरे को रीजनेबल कॉस्ट पे नहीं मिल रहा है, या फिर लैंड एक्वायर करने के लिए मेरे को कई सारे लोगों को ब्राइब करना पड़ रहा है. नंबर वन, the incompetent person will get right to that land, not the competent firm. The incompetent person will get to produce those goods. Secondly, when an incompetent person gets to produce those goods, or incompetent private sector emerges, that doesn't mean that your economy is going to grow at a desired pace. So you require, side by side with economic reforms, you require administrative and financial reforms as well. Administrative reforms pertain to how are decisions taken. Financial reforms pertain to how does money circulate, how is money made available to the economy. These are the two basic factors which have inhibited our growth potential. Administrative reforms and financial reforms. केवल कह देने से कि हम प्राइवेट सेक्टर को लेके आ रहे हैं, फिर लिबरलाइज कर रहे हैं, दैट इज जस्ट अ वर्ड ऑफ माउथ. अगर प्राइवेट सेक्टर को 50 परमिशन और लेनी पड़े तो फिर क्या फायदा? That is the broad reason, that is at the broad level, that is the reason why our private sector did not grow, or our economy did not grow at a pace that we expected. Compare it with China. Their takeoff year somewhere around 1970s, in 1970s. South Korea, their takeoff year 1960s, late 1960s. Japan, their takeoff year 1960s. South Asian economies, their takeoff years 1980s. अगर साउथ एशियन इकोनॉमीज की ग्रोथ देखें फ्रॉम देयर टेक ऑफ ईयर 1980, चाइनीज इकोनॉमी की ग्रोथ देखें फ्रॉम देयर टेक ऑफ ईयर 1972, जापान और साउथ कोरिया की ग्रोथ देखें फ्रॉम देयर टेक ऑफ ईयर 1967, वर्सेस इंडियन इकोनॉमी की ग्रोथ देखें फ्रॉम कोट एंड कोट अवर टेक ऑफ ईयर 1991. ग्रोथ रेट ऑफ ईच ऑफ दीज इकोनॉमीज कंपेयर्ड आफ्टर देयर टेक ऑफ ईयर, once they have took off, then what is their growth rate? Indian economy's growth rate has been the lowest in the average rate of growth amongst all its peers. क्या हो, कोई प्रॉब्लम है? Indian economy's growth rate has been lowest amongst all its peers since its year of takeoff. On an average, our economy since 1991 has grown at a rate of about 6.5%. Chinese economy grew continuously at double-digit rate of growth in 1980s and 90s. 20 साल तक लगातार Chinese economy grew at a double-digit rate of growth. South Asian economies grew at a respectable about 7 to 8% rate of growth continuously for about 15 years. So with Japanese and Korean economy, 1960s, late 1960s में उनका start हुआ, in 1970s, 80s, up till 90s, they were growing at a reasonably fast pace. Whereas us, not so much. Reason? Lack of administrative and financial reforms. Unable to achieve, inhibit us from achieving our desired pace of growth. ठीक है? चलो, start करते हैं अब. Let's start with our discussion now from where we left yesterday. Okay, let's start. So yesterday we started with the discussion on government budgeting. In government budgeting, fiscal policy and government budgeting, we first looked at, we discussed that there are going to be two aspects that we are going to discuss. One is, how is government budget prepared? उसमें हमने discuss कर लिया था line item budget, performance budget, program budget, outcome budget, gender based budgeting, zero based budgeting, ये सब चीजें हमने discuss करी उसके अंदर. The second aspect that we have to discuss, the major portion of this chapter, is analytical part of government budget. And we discussed in that, in analytical part of government budget, we are going to have a look at, number one, what is government budget? What is the objective of a government budget? And then, how are those objectives sought to be achieved? In order to see the objective and how are those objectives sought to be achieved, we need to understand some basic terms first. कल हमने broad discussion on objectives किया था. We discussed that a government, by preparing its budget, seeks to perform three essential functions. The expenditure or allocation function, through which it allocates public goods. The distribution function, from taxes, how it collects taxes, how much it collects, from whom does it collect. And stabilization function, that is, what is the extent of expenditure and taxes and how does it affect various macroeconomic variables. Inflation, growth, unemployment, exports, competitiveness, etc. It tries to achieve certain goals broadly, which we term as stabilization function. Next we discussed, every government would always want to achieve these noble goals. Some governments चाहेंगी that they are able to provide public goods. Every government will want that they are able to reduce inequality. Every government would want to achieve aspects of stabilization of economy, growth, as in GDP growth, inflation, unemployment, export, सब चीज. What differentiates different government budgets or different governments is the manner in which they try to achieve these goals. The manner in which they try to achieve these goals, essentially, they are called as growth models. What is the growth model of an economy? As in, how does an economy pursues growth? उसमें हमने discuss किया था trickle down or inclusive growth, which we had already discussed in our discussion on inequality. Trickle down approach and inclusive growth. We also discussed sustainable development. And then the next aspect of growth models is investment models. Growth models क्या है? That how does an economy plan to grow? How does an economy plan to achieve its objectives? Investment model is more specific look at what exactly is the government going to do of achieving those objectives. More specific view, more closer view of how does government actually achieve its objectives. That is, how does government choose which sectors to invest money in, which regions to invest money in, which areas of economy to focus upon so that they can grow, so that economy may achieve competitiveness, so that there will be employment in the country, so that welfare of maximum number of people can be achieved in the country. A more closer look at how does government actually spend money. That is what is discussed in investment models. In the initial days, investment model followed by the country was Harrod-Domar based Nehru-Mahalanobis model. That government chose that we have to focus on heavy industry led development, policy of import substitution and heavy industry led development. Slowly and steadily that policy gave way to more liberalization of the economy, as in export oriented development. From import substitution, we moved slowly towards export promotion. Investment model or the manner in which money was being spent or government resources were being focused changed from focusing on imports to promoting exports. Then comes very specific investment model, as in how should government invest. That is what is studied in PPP, public private partnerships. Limited amount of government resource and where does it spend, studied under PPP models. Build, operate, transfer, HAM model, EPC model. This is what you are going to study in your investment model section. Now comes studying some basic terms with respect to government budget, or broadly which is studied under the head of accounting in government budget. अभी हम थोड़ा सा काम अकाउंटिंग वाला करने वाले हैं. अकाउंटिंग करने के लिए देखो, एनालिसिस करने के लिए अगर हमको ट्रेंड समझना है कि गवर्नमेंट ने कितना एक्सपेंडिचर किया, गवर्नमेंट का डेफिसिट कितना है, तो उससे पहले हमारे को वो टर्मिनोलॉजी क्लियर होनी चाहिए. टू अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट इज फिस्कल डेफिसिट, what is the trend of fiscal deficit, what is the objective, what are the consequences of fiscal deficit. First we should know what fiscal deficit is. To understand what fiscal deficit is, we should know what expenditure of government is, what income of government is. So in order to do analysis, we first have to familiarize ourselves with the accounting part. सबको समझ में आया हम क्या करने वाले हैं? हम हमारा गोल एनालिसिस का ही है. We will ultimately analyze government budget. But to analyze, first we have to understand some basic terms. We have to do accounting. We have to see how is accounting done in government budget. Basic terms हम देखने वाले हैं. So let's start with first understanding the basics. Basics is going to take today's class and almost half of tomorrow's class. I think full tomorrow's, कल की भी पूरी क्लास लग जानी चाहिए. फिर लास्ट क्लास में हम एनालिसिस पार्ट करेंगे. So basics important है, एग्जाम में पूछे जाते हैं बेसिक एस्पेक्ट, अकाउंटिंग वाले पार्ट. So let's start with that. Accounting in government budget. Let's see how to do accounting in government budget, or what is exactly this accounting in government budget. This is Article 112 in front of you. Article 112 of the Constitution is here. Article 112 states government will present before the Parliament a statement of estimated receipts and expenses of government. Mind the word estimated. To present before the Parliament a statement of estimated receipts and expenses of the government for every financial year. This is the annual financial statement, and the expenditure must distinguish expenses on revenue account and other account. To present before the Parliament a statement of estimated receipts and expenses of the government for every financial year. And this annual financial statement must distinguish expenses on revenue account and other account. तो हमको अब यहां से टर्म्स समझ में आ गई कि क्या क्या पढ़ना है. टर्म्स का मतलब नहीं पता है, लेकिन क्या क्या पढ़ना हमको पता चल गया. Estimated receipts, expenses of government for every financial year, FY. Annual financial statement which must distinguish expenses on revenue and other account. What is this other account? What is this revenue account? Revenue account of budget, capital account of budget. What is planned budget? What is non-planned budget? ये सब चीजें हम इसके अंदर पढ़ने वाले. Let's have a look at these terms now. Let's try to understand what these terms are. Annual financial statement. Annual financial statement. What is a financial statement? A financial statement is simply a statement of accounts. Statement of accounts. This is what annual financial statement is. Statement of account means in your account there is some debit, there is some credit. अपने account की statement देखते हो बैंक की, तो कुछ debit है, कुछ credit है. Debit and credit is basically, credit is what you earn, debit is what you spend. credit what comes in, debit what goes out. Reference movie यार चलो. Debit what is spent from your account, credit what enters into your account. Statement of account. Annual financial statement is simply statement of account of the government. How much has government earned and how much has government spent? Every year this must be presented before the parliament. Estimates of receipts and expenses. Estimates of receipts and expenses. Estimates का मतलब क्या है? Estimate कब present करोगे? You will present estimates in future. You will present estimate in present for future. If you present estimates today for past, they are not estimates, they are actuals. If you present budget in the parliament today and that budget pertains to expenses and revenue of past, तो वो budget है या फिर वो actuals है? That is actual income earned in past, actual expenditure done in past. But what does our financial statement say? Our article 112 states, that you have to present estimates. Estimates क्या होंगे? Presented in present for future. You present estimates of incomes that you are going to earn and expenditure that you are going to do for future. That future pertains to coming financial year, next financial year. What is a financial year? Financial year is simply a period of 1 year in which you do your financial accounting. Your calendar year runs from 1st January to 31st December. Financial year is simply, सबको पता है financial year, 1st April to 31st March. Financial year is simply that year in which you do your accounting. Financial year, we studied GDP. Definition of GDP was value of goods and services produced in a country, produced in an economy in a given time period, usually a year. It is a flow variable, not a stock variable. Value of output produced in a year at value of output produced in one particular year versus value of output produced at a particular moment of time. Statement of your account. अभी प्रेजेंट स्टेटमेंट दिखाऊं क्या है या फिर बताऊं कि एक साल की स्टेटमेंट क्या होने वाली है? If you open up your bank account statement right now, that statement is for a particular period. उसमें लिखा होगा कि आपको कितने टाइम की स्टेटमेंट चाहिए? 30 दिन की, 1 हफ्ते की, 2 महीने की, 3 महीने की. It is for a particular period. Statement of account is presented for a particular period. Versus if I ask you how much money is there in your account at this moment, so then at this moment is for this particular, at this particular moment of time. अभी आपके अकाउंट में 5 लाख रुपए हैं वर्सेस आपके अकाउंट की स्टेटमेंट पिछले 3 महीने की है. Government is expected to present an annual financial statement of 1 year. Next financial year, the year in which government is, the year for which, the time period for which the government is expected to present its financial statements. This year runs from 1st April to 31st March. 1st April 2021 to 31st March 2022. Government has to present budget before this date, estimates before this date for this year. Number one. Second, how does government has to present? What is the format of the presentation? जो फॉर्म है जहां पे प्रेजेंट करोगे उसका प्रेजेंटेशन का फॉर्मेट क्या है? किस तरीके से एक्सपेंसेस को क्लासिफाई करोगे? किस तरीके से इनकम्स को अर्न करोगे? जैसे मैंने बोला था हम अकाउंटिंग पढ़ने वाले हैं. हाउ विल यू क्लासिफाई योर एक्सपेंसेस? व्हाट विल बी द ब्रॉड हेडिंग्स ऑफ योर एक्सपेंसेस? हाउ विल यू क्लासिफाई योर इनकम्स? Similarly, what would be the broad heads under which you will divide your income? This is what we study in this chapter. Our article 112 gives us a hint that it says that expenses should be divided into revenue account and other account. Revenue and other account. This word other has come to mean capital. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में नहीं लिखा है कैपिटल अकाउंट, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में लिखा है रेवेन्यू एंड अदर अकाउंट. एक्सपेंसेस मस्ट बी डिस्टिंग्विश्ड ऑन रेवेन्यू एंड अदर अकाउंट. द वर्ड अदर हैज कम टू बी इंटरप्रेटेड as the word capital. I'll repeat, the constitution does not mention capital, but the word other has now been interpreted as capital. What is revenue? What is capital? Let's see. Very, very important distinction coming up. Prelims में सवाल पूछा जा चुका है, इसके ऊपर पूछा जा सकता है बाद में कभी भी. टेस्ट सीरीज में इसके ऊपर सवाल पूछे जाते हैं कि रेवेन्यू क्या है, कैपिटल क्या है. Prelims में many times they have asked a question, which of the following is revenue expenditure, which of the following is plan expenditure, which of the following is capital expenditure. Many times they have asked this question. कई बार. एक बार हम डेफिनेशन समझ गए क्या है रेवेन्यू और कैपिटल की, कभी गलती नहीं करेंगे इसमें. We'll never make a mistake in what revenue is, what capital is, once we understand the definition. Let's understand what is revenue and what is capital. Revenue account and capital account. Let's understand. Revenue and capital. Revenue versus capital account. Revenue account versus capital account. Balance of payments हो गया ना? Balance of payments हो गया. आपने current account, capital account पढ़ लिया होगा? Not fully. But at least name current account हो गया होगा ना? नाम current account सुना होगा. वहां पे आप एक और नाम सुनोगे capital account. In your balance of payments, you have heard the name current account. You will come across one more term, capital account there. This capital and that capital are completely different. This capital account and that capital account are completely different. दोनों का नाम बिल्कुल सेम है कैपिटल अकाउंट, लेकिन दोनों बिल्कुल अलग हैं एक दूसरे से. No relation whatsoever between this capital and that capital account. आपका बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट का जो अकाउंट है वो अलग है, वहां पे कैपिटल का कोनोटेशन अलग है, यहां पे कैपिटल का कोनोटेशन अलग है. नेवर कंफ्यूज कैपिटल अकाउंट हेयर वर्सेस इन बीओपी. देयर माइट बी सेम और सिमिलर थिंग्स, बट प्लीज सेपरेट दीज टू थिंग्स. प्लीज सेपरेट कैपिटल अकाउंट अंडरस्टैंडिंग फ्रॉम द पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू ऑफ फिस्कल पॉलिसी, capital accounts understanding from the point of view of external sector, that is balance of payments. Please separate these two things together completely. What is capital, what is revenue account in respect of government budgeting? फटाफट देख लेते हैं क्या है, बहुत आसान चीज है. कैपिटल एंड रेवेन्यू. कैपिटल डिफाइन करेंगे और जो कैपिटल नहीं है वो बन जाएगा रेवेन्यू. We'll define what capital is, and whatever falls outside the definition of capital will become revenue. Constitution writes revenue and other. That means Constitution says that you present me what is revenue and whatever is left is other. Constitution article 112 में क्या लिखा है? Expenses must be distinguished on revenue account and other expenses. You tell me what is revenue and whatever else is there is other. ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में लिखा है. वर्सेस हम क्या करने वाले हैं अब अपनी समझ के लिए, अपनी डेफिनेशन के लिए, अपनी सहूलियत के लिए क्या करेंगे हम? So that we never make mistake. Once we understand it, we are never going to make mistake. What is revenue, what is capital? Please understand how we will approach this problem. We will approach this problem as capital versus non-capital. We will understand what capital is, whatever is not capital is revenue. उसके बाद हम डिफाइन करते रहेंगे रेवेन्यू क्या है. लेकिन एक बार हम ये समझ गए फिर गलती कभी नहीं होगी. We will define what revenue is independently, that is independent of capital. हम define करेंगे what revenue is, do not worry. But for our exam purposes, for understanding so that we never make mistake, what we'll do is we will define capital first and then look at what revenue is. What is capital? Capital account. Capital account is that any kind of transaction, basically हम statement of account बना रहे हैं, statement of account as in incoming and outgoing. Incoming is your income, outgoing is your expense. I have got my account. In my account, if I receive something, that is my income. If I spend something, that is my expense. Statement of account of government, if you receive something, that is your income. If you spend something, that is your expense. सरकार का भी अकाउंट ऐसा ही होगा. उस अकाउंट में, गवर्नमेंट के अकाउंट में, अपने अकाउंट में आपके क्या है? डेबिट एंड क्रेडिट. डेबिट एंड क्रेडिट. इन गवर्नमेंट अकाउंट, debit is divided into revenue and capital, and credit is divided into revenue and capital. Incomes are divided into revenue income and capital income, and expenses are divided into revenue expenses and capital expenses. So if we look at government account, any account, if we look at any account, कोई भी हम अगर account देखेंगे, in that account, basically what do we expect to find? We expect basically we expect to find incomes and expenses. किसी भी अकाउंट के दो पार्ट यही होंगे ना, इनकम कितनी हुई और एक्सपेंसेस. इनकमिंग कितनी है और एक्सपेंस कितनी है. एनी अकाउंट इन दी वर्ल्ड, एनीवेयर, चाहे गवर्नमेंट को चाहे प्राइवेट सेक्टर, किसी का भी अकाउंट विल हैव इनकम्स एंड एक्सपेंसेस एसेंशियली. What constitution says that you have to distinguish expenses into revenue expense and other expense. Revenue expense, everyone please pay attention. It's very easy if you pay attention. बहुत आसान हो जाएगा. Any account anywhere in the world, you expect classification in income and expense. Our constitution says that expenses must be classified as revenue expenses and other expenses. This is our constitution. This is what the constitution says. What we also do is simultaneously, I'll write it in different color. This is what our constitution says. What we also do simultaneously, we also divide our incomes into revenue incomes and other incomes. अदर इनकम्स. क्या है रेवेन्यू, क्या है अदर, मैंने नहीं बताया, मैं बताऊंगा आपको. बट आई होप दिस पॉइंट इज क्लियर टू एवरीबॉडी. एनी अकाउंट इन द वर्ल्ड विल हैव टू पार्ट्स, इनकम्स एंड एक्सपेंसेस. Our constitution says that you have to segregate your expenses into two categories, revenue expense and other expense. Okay, we say that we will do one more thing. Just like we segregate our expenses into two parts, revenue and other, we will also segregate our income into two parts, revenue and other. This other is now understood as capital. इस other को हम capital understand करते हैं. Revenue income and capital income. Revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. We understand this word other as capital. If I now break down my account, I can also break down my account like this. जैसे मैंने ये अपने अकाउंट को ब्रेक डाउन किया है into income and expenses, and income and expenses are broken down into revenue income, capital income, revenue expense, capital expense. Now अब मैं ये काम भी कर सकता हूं ना, I can break down my account again. Statement of account बना रहा हूं. I can break down into revenue account and capital account. Revenue account and capital account. Revenue account will have revenue expenditure, and capital account, revenue account will have revenue expenditure and revenue income. Similarly, capital account will have capital expenditure and capital income. Capital expenditure and capital income. सबको ये सब समझ में आया कि नहीं? Is this clear to everybody? यही अकाउंट है. इस अकाउंट को ब्रेक डाउन करने का पहला तरीका क्या था? इनकम और एक्सपेंस में ब्रेक डाउन किया. बहुत आसान है. इनकम दो टाइप के, रेवेन्यू और कैपिटल इनकम. एक्सपेंस दो टाइप के, रेवेन्यू और कैपिटल एक्सपेंस. अब मैंने क्या किया? अब मैंने सेम अकाउंट को दो टाइप में ब्रेक कर लिया, रेवेन्यू अकाउंट एंड कैपिटल अकाउंट. रेवेन्यू पार्ट ऑफ माई अकाउंट एंड कैपिटल पार्ट ऑफ माई अकाउंट. Revenue part of my account consists of revenue expenditure and revenue income. Capital part of my account consists of capital expenditure and capital income. Simply, the manner in which I am looking at the account has changed. Rather than looking at in terms of incomes and expenses, I am looking it in terms of revenue part and capital part. Revenue part will have its own expense and income. Capital part will have its own expense and income. Simply the manner in which I look at the account has changed. Now let me define what is revenue and what is capital. As I said, what we'll do is we will first define what capital is and then whatever is left will be revenue. हमने अकाउंट को दो भाग में बांट दिया, रेवेन्यू और कैपिटल पार्ट में. अब हम क्या कर रहे हैं, हम डिफाइन कर रहे हैं. वी आर डिफाइनिंग व्हाट इज कैपिटल. वी आर गोइंग टू डिफाइन व्हाट इज कैपिटल और व्हाट type of income or expense is going to be categorized as capital income or capital expense, and whatever is left will be categorized either as revenue income or revenue expense. That is, it would fall in revenue account. तो अब हमारे पास जितना भी पूरा लाइन आइटम बजट है उसको अब सेग्रीगेट करना है, इसमें से क्या रेवेन्यू है क्या कैपिटल है. लेट्स डिफाइन व्हाट कैपिटल इज. Capital account is defined as that. Pay attention सब लोग. Capital account क्या है? Capital account. Capital account. It consists of capital expenditure and capital income. थोड़ा सा फॉर्मलाइजेशन कर देता हूं. Let me introduce a little bit formal language here also. In government accounts, in government statistics, rather than using the word income, we use the word receipt. Government's receipt. तो income word को receipt से replace कर दूं. I'm just going to replace the word income with receipt. Income नहीं बोलते, receipt बोलते हैं सरकार के उसको. Let me replace the word income with receipt. Revenue receipt. Rather than income, I will simply use the word receipt. Capital income की बजाय capital receipt. क्लियर है? कुछ नहीं किया, बस ना फॉर्मल टर्म. फॉर्मल लैंग्वेज इज रिसीट, इनफॉर्मली हम इनकम बोल सकते हैं. कैपिटल रिसीट, केवल नाम चेंज किया और कुछ नहीं. एनीथिंग दैट हैज एन इफेक्ट ऑन एसेट्स एंड लाइबिलिटीज इज क्लासिफाइड इन कैपिटल अकाउंट. कैपिटल अकाउंट, एनीथिंग दैट हैज a bearing on, that has a bearing on assets and liabilities of government is categorized as part of capital account, as part of capital account. ये capital account की definition है. Anything that has a bearing on assets and liabilities is categorized as part of capital account. मतलब इंपॉर्टेंट चीज क्या है यहां पे? एसेट एंड लाइबिलिटी. एसेट एंड लाइबिलिटी. वीडियो स्टॉप्ड. रिफ्रेश कर लो यार, वीडियो स्टॉप हो गया तो. अरे आवाज आ रही है ना? वीडियो अगर स्टॉप भी हो गया तो आवाज आ रही है ना? हाँ, यार वीडियो स्टॉप हुआ था तो ठीक है. ऑडियो स्टॉप, अगर ऑडियो में कोई प्रॉब्लम हुई हो तो बता दो. इफ ऑडियो वॉज देयर, ओनली वीडियो स्टॉप, देन आई थिंक दैट कैन बी मैनेज. बट इफ ऑडियो स्टॉप, देन आई विल रिपीट. लिख दो एक बार इनको चैट पोर्टल पे. आई एम नॉट टीचिंग, आई हैव स्टॉप्ड. इनको चैट पोर्टल पे लिख दो. डोंट पैनिक. स्टार्ट हो गया? क्या हो गया था? हैं? अच्छा, चलो एक बार इनका आ जाए, यहाँ पे नॉट वर्किंग। लैग के साथ आता है ना, 20-25 सेकंड लैग होता है। I'll repeat, don't worry if you can hear me or see me, I'll repeat, I'm not teaching. Don't worry, I've just paused. यार ये अभी भी कह रहे हैं अब नहीं वर्किंग नाउ, आ तो रहा है और ओके तो आ रहा है वैसे अब। ठीक है, चलो चलो लेट्स देखो, nobody can do anything. I can technology a little bit of there would be glitches here and there. Nothing from our side, nothing from your side. We are using a medium to convey. ब्रॉडबैंड तो हमारा, ब्रॉडबैंड का लीज लाइन तो हमारी है नहीं. There is some issue in internet. We do, I think, we do respond as quickly as possible. It's okay. कुछ you have not missed anything. I'll just recap what I just said. So everybody please pay attention back. I'll recap just what I said. I don't know where it went when I replaced income by receipt. ठीक है, मैं वहां से दोबारा से explain करता हूँ. वो मेन पॉइंट पे एकदम चला गया, एकदम मेन एस्पेक्ट पे चला गया था. Don't worry. Everybody please calm down, please chill, relax. Don't worry, don't panic. I'll recap. चलो सब लोग वापस से यहाँ पे देखो, अब चैट करना बंद करो, यहाँ पे देखो. We were discussing revenue account and capital account. Simply we looked at account can be broken down into or can be segregated into revenue part and capital part. Revenue receipt and revenue expense, capital receipt and capital expense. Last time जहां पे गया था आपने बोला था इनकम की बजाय मैंने रिसीट लिखा था, वहां पे गया था. I simply said that let's introduce a little bit formal language here. Formally the word income is called receipt. Replace the word revenue income with revenue receipt. Replace the word capital income with capital receipt. Simply that is what I said. We were now on to defining capital account. Capital account को कैसे define करते हैं? Capital account, I said, I'll repeat again. Capital account is that account. Those transactions will be categorized as part of capital account. Those expenses and those receipts. Those transactions will be categorized under capital account which have a bearing on assets and liability of the government. Anything that has a bearing on assets and liability of the government is categorized as part of capital account. Anything that has a bearing on assets and liabilities of the government is categorized as part of capital account. तो क्या इंपॉर्टेंट है कैपिटल अकाउंट के लिए? एसेट्स एंड लायबिलिटी, एसेट्स एंड लायबिलिटीज. Anything that has a bearing on assets and liabilities, that is what capital account is. Assets देख लेते हैं, फिर liability देख लेते हैं. गवर्नमेंट के assets, assets of the government. Let's see, Air India is an asset of the government. Government company है Air India. Government asset Air India. Government sells Air India. When government sells Air India, what happens to government's assets? They reduce. पहले गवर्नमेंट का एसेट था एयर इंडिया और अब गवर्नमेंट का एसेट नहीं है एयर इंडिया. When government sells Air India, its assets reduce. Number one. Number two, when it sells Air India, it will receive a payment. Air India बेची तो पेमेंट मिलेगा ना सरकार को. There would be receipt for the government. What is a capital receipt? Capital receipt is anything that leads to reduction of assets. Whenever there is a reduction of assets, then there are capital receipts. Any kind of transaction which is leading to reduction of assets, that leads to generation of capital receipt. I'll repeat with the example of Air India again. Air India is government's assets. BSNL is government's asset. Government holds 75% in SBI. रिकैपिटलाइजेशन करने के लिए गवर्नमेंट ने अपनी इक्विटी डाइल्यूट कर दी. गवर्नमेंट सेल्स 5% ऑफ इट्स होल्डिंग इन एसबीआई. अर्लियर गवर्नमेंट हेल्ड 75% of SBI. Now it holds 70% of SBI. Government has sold 5% of its holding. Therefore, government's asset has reduced. When government's asset has reduced, this is accompanied by a simultaneous receipt for the government. Asset बेचा और receipt मिली. I have sold Air India, I get money. I have sold BSNL, I get money. I have sold 5% in SBI, I get money. Any transaction that results in generation of any transaction that results in reduction of assets would be categorized as part of capital account in capital receipt part. Capital receipts are those receipts which result in reduction of assets. Capital receipts are those receipts which result in reduction of assets. What about capital expenditure? Government spends 1000 crores in building of road. Government spends 1000 crores in building of some kind of port. Government spends some money to create a new company. When government spends money which results in creation of an asset, when government spends money that results in creation of an asset, then for that government will have to incur some expenditure. कोई asset बनाना है, some asset has to be made, then government will incur an expenditure or not? उसके लिए पैसा खर्च करना पड़ेगा. रोड बनानी है, पोर्ट बनाना है, कोई कंपनी खड़ी करनी है. गवर्नमेंट विल हैव टू स्पेंड मनी टू डू दैट. Expenditure will be incurred in lieu of that creation of that asset. Any expenditure that results in creation of assets is called as capital expenditure. Any asset, any expenditure that results in creation of asset is categorized as capital expense. हमारे पास expense है कोई, हमको नहीं पता कि वो एक्सपेंस रेवेन्यू अकाउंट में जाएगा या कैपिटल अकाउंट में जाएगा. विल दैट एक्सपेंस गो एज पार्ट ऑफ कैपिटल एक्सपेंस और रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंस? The definition is that if the expense leads to creation of an asset, then it is a capital expense. There is some receipt, सरकार को कहीं से पैसा मिला है. We don't know whether the money that the government has got is on capital receipt or is on revenue receipt, is part of capital account or revenue account. How will we categorize? We will see that was this receipt received when some asset was sold off. If this receipt is received as a result of reduction of asset, then it is a capital receipt. अगर इस रिसीट को रिसीव करते समय कोई एसेट कम हुआ है, then it is a capital receipt. If some asset has been created, then it is a capital expenditure. This is how we define capital account. Capital account is that account that has a bearing on assets and liability. Asset की bearing देख ली हमने. How does it bear? What is the bearing on assets? Anything that results in creation of assets is capital expenditure. Anything that results in reduction of asset is capital receipt. Liability देख लेते हैं. Liability example के साथ समझ में आएगा. Liability of the government, loan. Government of India has borrowed money from somewhere. When Government of India has borrowed money from somewhere, that means a liability was created for Government of India. सरकार ने बैंक से पैसा लिया. Government of India borrowed money from bank. When Government of India borrowed money from bank, what happens in this case? It is a borrowing by government from bank. That is, bank has paid money to government as a loan. गवर्नमेंट ने बोरो किया, तो इसका मतलब गवर्नमेंट के पास पैसा आया है या गवर्नमेंट से पैसा गया है? गवर्नमेंट हैज बोरोड मनी, दैट मींस हैज मनी come to the government or is money going out of the government? Money is coming to the government. It will go out in future, but अभी present में पैसा सरकार के पास आया है. Money has come to the government. Government has borrowed means money has come in to the government account. मैंने पैसा borrow किया है तो मेरे अकाउंट में पैसा आया है. Money has come to my account. I have to return it, that's a different case. That's certainty, I have to return it. But presently, money has come to my account. Government has borrowed money. Therefore, it is a receipt for the government. Money has been received by the government. This money is received as a consequence of creation of a liability. गवर्नमेंट की लाइबिलिटी क्रिएट हुई कि नहीं? लाइबिलिटी टू रिटर्न दिस मनी इन फ्यूचर विद इंटरेस्ट. मनी वॉज रिसीव्ड बाय द गवर्नमेंट, simultaneously a liability was created, liability being that you have to return this money in future with interest. Any receipt of the government that is because of creation of liability, creation of a liability results in creation of a capital receipt. Capital receipt क्या है? Capital receipt is something that is created, received as a result of creation of liability. अगर liability create हो रही है, if liability is being created as a consequence of some receipt, then that receipt will be categorized as capital receipt. मनी आया सरकार के पास, अकाउंट में लिखा गया दैट गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडियाज अकाउंट इज क्रेडिटेड विद 1 लाख करोड़ रुपीज. द accountant who is responsible to categorize doesn't know whether it is capital receipt or revenue receipt. सरकार के अकाउंट में क्या लिखा है? that money has been credited, 1 लाख करोड़ रुपए आपके अकाउंट में आ गया. अब आपको नहीं पता एज एन अकाउंटेंट, आप इंडियन अकाउंट सर्विसेज में हो, यू डोंट नो वेदर इट इज रेवेन्यू रिसीट और कैपिटल रिसीट. तो क्या लॉजिक लगाना है? लॉजिक इज दैट वेदर दिस रिसीट रिजल्टेड इन क्रिएशन ऑफ सम लायबिलिटी और नॉट, whether this money has to be paid back with interest or not. If yes, it is capital receipt. If no, it is revenue receipt. If this money was received by government as a result of creation of a liability, it is capital receipt. Liability, bearing of liability, if yes, capital account. Receipt, then yes, capital receipt. Versus government had borrowed this money 1 lakh crore rupees. There was a liability of the government. Now, out of this liability of 1 lakh crore, government has paid 1000 crores. 1000 करोड़ रुपया सरकार ने वापस पे कर दिया. Liability of government has reduced. Earlier, government was paying interest on 1 lakh crore. Now it will pay interest on 99,000 crores. Liability of government has reduced or not? In order to reduce this liability, 1000 crores have to be spent by government. Government spends 1000 crore rupees in order to reduce this liability. Money has been spent. Money has been spent which has resulted in reduction of liability. Such money is categorized as part of capital expenditure. हुआ नंबर 1 हमने क्या देखा? पैसा स्पेंड हुआ, अकाउंट से 1000 करोड़ रुपए डेबिट हो गया. Money has been spent by government. How much? 1000 crore rupees. Now, this money, मेरे को नहीं पता कि मनी कैपिटल अकाउंट में जाएगा या रेवेन्यू अकाउंट में जाएगा. मेरे को पता है एक्सपेंस है, मनी हैज बीन डेबिटेड, इट इज एन एक्सपेंस. नंबर 1. Whether it's a capital expense, whether it's a revenue expense, I don't know. How will I check whether it's a capital revenue expense? I will see, has this expenditure resulted in reduction of liability? लाइबिलिटी पहले 1 लाख करोड़ रुपए थी, अब वो घट के 99,000 करोड़ रह गई है. सो यस, दिस एक्सपेंस हैज रिजल्टेड इन रिडक्शन ऑफ लाइबिलिटी. Therefore, it will be categorized as part of capital expense. Reduction of liability. I will dictate all these. Please pay attention. Please लिखना मत अभी कुछ भी. मैं सबको आप dictate करूंगा और अच्छे से, as in ढंग से यहाँ पे जो इतना कुछ बना रखा है, I'll dictate it properly. Capital account is that account which has a bearing on assets and liabilities. If expenditure is such, if there is an expenditure incurred by the government, if the expenditure results in either creation of an asset or reduction of liability, then such an expenditure is called capital expenditure, is categorized as part of capital expenditure. An expense that results in creation, मैं example के साथ लिखवाऊंगा, please अभी मत लिखना. If expenditure has been incurred by the government and that expense results in either creation of an asset or reduction of the liability, then such an expense is called as capital expense. If there is a receipt of the government, if government has received money, if the receipt is such that it is a result of reduction of assets or creation of liabilities, if there is some receipt that creates liabilities or leads to reduction of assets, then such a receipt is categorized as capital receipt. उसको हम बोलेंगे capital receipt. This is what capital account is, capital expenditure and capital income, capital receipts. मेरे ख्याल से सबको क्लियर होना चाहिए कि क्या है capital account, expenses and receipts. Examples भी मैंने आपको दिए. Example of reduction of assets, government sells Air India, BSNL. Example of creation of liability, government borrows money. Government borrows money. Example of creation of asset, government builds a road, asset is created. Example of reduction of liability, government pays back a loan, liability gets reduced. Capital account, capital expense and capital receipt. I hope this is clear to everybody कि क्या है capital account. I'll dictate, please don't worry. Dictation के बाद please ask questions after I dictate. जब मैं लिखवा दूंगा उसके बाद सवाल पूछना. Example के साथ लिखवाऊंगा. अभी के लिए broadly समझ में आना चाहिए. जब हम dictation करेंगे उसके बाद और clearly समझ में आएगा. Next, revenue. Anything which is not capital is revenue. ये हमारा एग्जाम में लॉजिक होगा. In our exam, the logic is going to be, if there is no effect on assets and liabilities, no bearing on assets and liabilities of the government, then it will go into revenue account. सरकार ने टैक्स रिसीव किया. गवर्नमेंट रिसीव्स टैक्सेस. गवर्नमेंट के अकाउंट में लिखा है अ टैक्स हैज बीन रिसीव्ड वर्थ 1 लाख करोड़ रुपीज. नाउ is that tax received because some asset was sold? Is it received because some borrowing has been done? No. Tax receive हुआ है as a matter of right. Government has received that tax as a matter of right. That is not a result of either reduction of assets or creation of liability. It is revenue receipt of the government. Taxes are examples of revenue receipt of the government. Fine, fee. आपने ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस बनाया and you have paid a fee for to get your driving license made. You have jumped the red light, you have paid a fine for jumping the red light. The money goes to the government. When government receives that fee or that fine, then is it because of reduction of government's assets or some creation of liability? No. Government has received it either as a matter of right, largely as a matter of right, or because government is doing some duty. It has taken a payment in return for a duty. Right, सरकार का right ही है. Is it capital receipt or revenue receipt? It is revenue receipt. Why? Because there is no effect on assets or liabilities. सरकार ने आपसे fine receive किया है. सरकार ने आपसे फीस रिसीव की है. It is revenue receipt. Revenue expense. Government pays money as a salary to its employees or as a pension to its ex-employees. सैलरी पे करी है सरकार ने. When government pays salary to its employees, does it create some asset? सरकार की आदमी को सैलरी मिली है, इज इट फॉर क्रिएशन? आप आईएएस बन गए, आपको सैलरी मिल रही है, इज इट क्रिएटिंग एन एसेट? नो. इज इट क्रिएटिंग सम रोड? नो. रोड बनाने पे खर्चा वो एसेट का खर्चा है, लेकिन आपको सैलरी देने का खर्चा वो एसेट का खर्चा नहीं है. दैट इज योर, यू गेट इट एज अ मैटर ऑफ राइट. गवर्नमेंट पेज टू यू एज अ मैटर ऑफ ड्यूटी. Government incurs that expense as a matter of duty. You get it as a matter of right. Government pays to you as a matter of duty. It is not leading to creation of some asset, or it is not leading to reduction of some liability. Government is duty bound to pay salary to its employees, contract bound to pay pension to its ex-employees. Government has to pay it. It doesn't create any asset or reduce any liability. That expense is part of revenue expense. Paying salaries, pensions, etc. ये क्या हो गए हमारे revenue expenses. This is our revenue and capital account. Now let's write down. अब हम इस चीज को लिखते हैं, और लिखने के लिए हमको एक टेबल बनाना पड़ेगा पहले. To write down, we have to make this table. I will tell you when to make this table. ये टेबल हम बनाएंगे. प्लीज पहले लिखना स्टार्ट करते हैं, उसके बाद हम ये टेबल बनाएंगे, एंड देन वील एक्सप्लेन ऑल दीज टर्म्स. वील राइट ऑल दीज टर्म्स. दिस टेबल इज कॉपी पेस्ट फ्रॉम योर एनसीईआरटी. गिव हेडिंग अकाउंटिंग इन गवर्नमेंट बजट. हेडिंग दो अकाउंटिंग इन गवर्नमेंट बजट. देखो, आर्टिकल 112 of the constitution requires, article 112 of the constitution requires the government to present estimates of its revenues. Its revenue mat likhna, please don't write the word revenue. Requires the government to present estimates of its incomes and expenses. Requires the government to present estimates of its incomes and expenses for every financial year, full stop. Further, it is required to clearly distinguish the expenses on revenue account and other account. Further, it is required to clearly distinguish expenses on revenue account and other account. तो स्टॉप, आगे लिखो. नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ में राइट डाउन. The other account has come to be understood. The other account has come to be understood as the capital account. Full stop. Therefore, the government's budget, which is essentially the statement of government's account, can be divided into two parts. Can be divided into two parts. The revenue account or revenue budget and capital account or capital budget can be divided into two parts. The revenue account or revenue budget or capital account or capital budget. Full stop. Now draw this. अब ये बनाओ, सब लोग बनाना. इस टाइप से आपका चार्ट बनना चाहिए. I will speak up whatever is written in the boxes. सबसे ऊपर लिखेंगे गवर्नमेंट बजट. सबसे ऊपर लिखो एवरीबॉडी. प्लीज बनाओ इस चीज को. विद इन 80 सेकेंड्स बना पाओगे इसको. बहुत आसान है. राइट डाउन गवर्नमेंट बजट, रेवेन्यू बजट, कैपिटल बजट. दो पार्ट में बांट दिया इसको. रेवेन्यू बजट एंड कैपिटल बजट. इसको दो पार्ट में बांटो. रेवेन्यू रिसीट्स, रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंसेस, कैपिटल रिसीट्स एंड कैपिटल एक्सपेंसेस. रेवेन्यू रिसीट्स, रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंसेस, कैपिटल रिसीट्स, कैपिटल एक्सपेंसेस. उसी के नीचे लिख लो यहां पे. यू डोंट नीड टू राइट सो मच. जितना यहां पे लिखा है इतना सब कुछ लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है, बिकॉज यू विल नॉट हैव दैट मच स्पेस कि सबको अलग अलग करके लिखे. रेवेन्यू रिसीट्स के नीचे लिखो टैक्स रिसीट्स एंड नॉन टैक्स रिसीट्स. इसको डिवाइड करके लिखो. राइट, टैक्स रिसीट्स एंड नॉन टैक्स, सॉरी, टैक्स रेवेन्यू एंड नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू. रेवेन्यू रिसीट्स के नीचे लिखो टैक्स रेवेन्यू एंड नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू. कैपिटल रिसीट्स के नीचे लिखो, ये मत लिखना रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर के नीचे प्लान नॉन प्लान लिखा है, डोंट राइट दिस. कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर के नीचे प्लान नॉन प्लान लिखा है, डोंट राइट दैट. कैपिटल रिसीट्स के नीचे लिखो, रेवेन्यू रिसीट्स के नीचे सबने लिख लिया टैक्स रिसीट्स एंड नॉन टैक्स रिसीट्स, टैक्स रेवेन्यू एंड नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू. कैपिटल रिसीट्स के नीचे लिखो, अगेन डिवाइडेड इनटू टू पार्ट्स. राइट डाउन डेट क्रिएटिंग कैपिटल रिसीट्स and non-debt creating capital receipts. Right? Debt creating, and that is one division, and second is non-debt creating, CR, non-debt creating CR, capital receipts. Debt creating CR and non-debt creating CR. Please divide capital receipts in two parts, debt creating CR and non-debt creating CR. After this line, जब आपने ये third level of division कर लिया है, after this third level of division, mark a star and write down. After you have drawn this third level of division, mark a star after that and write down. Expenses can be further divided into plan and non-plan expenses. Expenses can be further divided into plan and non-plan expenses. Full stop. However, this distinction has now been dispensed with. However, this distinction has now been dispensed with. अब नहीं करते हम प्लान नॉन प्लान में क्लासिफिकेशन, अब नहीं करते, पहले किया करते थे. However, this distinction has now been dispensed with. Please write. Now leave space, leave one line. Next paragraph में लिखो. अब हम लिखेंगे definitions लिखेंगे. Please write down. Capital budget. Write down first capital budget. देखो, the part of the budget that is the financial statement, the part of the budget that is financial statement, which has a bearing on assets and liabilities of the government, which has a bearing on assets and liabilities of the government, is capital budget, is capital budget. Write down first within this capital budget के नीचे first लिखो capital receipts, लिखो capital receipts. Write down any receipt of the government, any receipt, 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 any receipt of the government which is a result of reduction of an asset, which is a result of reduction of an asset or creation of a liability, or creation of a liability, is categorized as capital receipt, is categorized as capital receipt. For example, if government disinvests, for example, if government disinvests from its companies, if government disinvests from its companies, that is, sells them off to someone, that is, sells them off to someone, then government will receive money, but it will be received due to reduction of its assets. Then government will receive money, but it will be received due to reduction of its assets. Full stop. Such a receipt is capital receipt. Such a receipt is capital receipt. Full stop. Similarly, if government borrows money, comma, that results in creation of a liability, that results in creation of a liability, that is the government has to repay this amount, that is, the government has to repay this amount with interest in future, with interest in future. Full stop. Although the government has received money, but it is received as a result of creation of liability, Full stop. Such a receipt is also a capital receipt. Such a receipt is also a capital receipt. Full stop. Further, इसी point में लिखो, further it is categorized as a debt creating capital receipt, a debt creating capital receipt. as distinct from disinvestment receipt, as distinct from the disinvestment receipt which was an example of non-debt creating capital receipt, which was an example of non-debt creating capital receipt. Full stop. Next लिखो capital expenditure. Capital expenditure. लिखो any expenditure that results in either creation of capital assets, any expenditure that results in either creation of capital assets or reduction of liabilities, is termed as capital expense. So stop. For example, if government builds roads, or buys any other asset, or lends money to somebody, such as states or other countries, comma, in all such cases the government expense creates assets for the government, full stop. Further, if government repays its debt, comma, then its liabilities are reduced. Full stop. All such expenses are examples of capital expenditure. नेक्स्ट लाइन में स्पेस देके लिखना, स्टार मार्क करके लिखो, मार्क अ स्टार एंड राइट डाउन. To quickly distinguish between revenue and capital accounts, we try to see whether an expense or receipt can be categorized as capital, based on whether it has bearing on assets or liabilities. Based on whether it has bearing on assets or liabilities. Full stop. If not, comma, then it automatically becomes part of revenue account. If not, then it automatically becomes part of revenue account. Full stop. Next line में अब heading दो revenue account. Now give heading revenue account. Here we will define what revenue account is. Please write down. Receipts of the government and expenses done as a matter of performing its rights and duties, as a matter of its right, as a I'm sorry, थोड़ा सा गड़बड़ होगा, performing word पहले आ गया, as a matter of its rights or performance of its duties. गड़बड़ तुमको पता ही, अब तो आदत तुमको है ही, मैं काफी चीजें करेक्ट करवा देता हूं. As a matter of its rights and performance of its duties form part of revenue account. Form part of revenue account. देखो revenue account is associated with the functions which the government performs. Revenue account is associated with the functions which the government performs to carry out its sovereign duties, and to maintain and continue its existence. To maintain and continue, उसके आगे मत लिखना, to maintain and continue the existence of the state. Full stop. Such expenses and receipts are required to be distinguished. Such expenses and receipts are required to be distinguished as they help in knowing that how much does the government spend. As they help in knowing that how much does the government spend for performance of its duties, which are deemed essential. Full stop. नेक्स्ट लाइन में लिखो रेवेन्यू रिसीट्स. रिसीट की स्पेलिंग सब लोग सही लिखना. रिसीप्ट, RECEIPT. रेवेन्यू रिसीट्स लिखो. मनी दैट एक्रूज की स्पेलिंग accrues, ACCRUES, accrues. money that accrues to the government as a matter of right, money that accrues to the government as a matter of right is part of revenue receipts, is part of revenue receipts. Full stop. It is further classified as, tax revenue and non-tax revenue. It is further classified as tax revenue and non-tax revenue. Full stop. Non-tax revenue comprises of receipts such as fees, fines, etc. Fees, fines, etc. Full stop. Next, revenue expenditure. लिखो revenue expenditure में. It is the expense incurred by the government. To perform its sovereign functions. Full stop. For example, the government needs administrative staff for administration. The government needs administrative staff for administration. Full stop. The staff needs office, tables, chairs, stationery. The staff needs office, table, chair, stationery, etc. to perform their functions. Full stop. In order to attract best people for working in the government, government gives salaries and other benefits to its employees. Full stop. All such expenses are part of revenue expense of the government. All such expenses are part of revenue expense of the government. Full stop. Similarly, salaries and pensions paid to armed forces, salaries and pensions paid to armed forces, government teachers, etc. are also part of revenue expense of the government. Full stop. Further, the interest paid by the government on its liabilities. The interest paid by the government on its liabilities is also an essential sovereign duty. Interest paid by the government on its liabilities is also an essential sovereign duty, comma, hence it is also an example of revenue expense. Hence it is also an example of revenue expense. Full stop. मेरे ख्याल से सबको समझ में आ गया होगा क्या है रेवेन्यू, क्या है कैपिटल. आई हैव गिवन यू एनफ एग्जांपल्स of what revenue is, what capital is. Let's take a break. It's almost 7 o'clock. Let's take a break of about 5 minutes. 7:05 पे मिलते हैं. I hope that you have been able to understand what revenue account is, what capital account. This is one of the very important distinctions. After the break start हो चुका है. After the break, I'll tell you about this plan, non-plan classification. इसके बारे में आपको बताऊंगा, लेकिन इसके बारे में लिखवाऊंगा नहीं. I will not dictate about plan, non-plan classification. It has been dispensed away with. अब नहीं है plan, non-plan classification. जब dispense की गई थी, जब हमने बोला था कि अब plan, non-plan नहीं करेंगे, तब पूछ लिया गया था इसके बारे में सवाल. अब इसके बारे में सवाल नहीं पूछाएगा. प्लान नॉन प्लान क्या है, वी डोंट नीड टू बॉदर अबाउट दिस. बट व्हाट प्लान नॉन प्लान इज, आई विल एक्सप्लेन. इस ये क्या है मैं आपको एक्सप्लेन कर दूंगा क्या चीज है. ऐसा नहीं है कि छोटे में एक्सप्लेन करूं, आई विल एक्सप्लेन इट इलैबोरेटली. Why did we do away with this distinction? That also I'll tell you. Why did we do away with it? This is the major part of our, this is the major requirement. We should understand what capital is, what revenue is, what capital receipt, revenue, what capital receipt and capital expenses, what revenue receipt and revenue expenses. This is the main part that we need to understand. Let's take a break. We'll meet at 7:05 and then we'll continue with our discussion from here. ठीक है, चलो. किसी को कोई सवाल होगा तो पूछ लेना. ब्रेक में हम जब वापस लौटेंगे तब then we'll start with seeing the questions if there is any question. Let's start. 2 questions. Harsis का question है, sir, how are consolidated fund, contingency fund and public accounts mapped to these revenue, capital and current account? Are these just subheadings of a program budgeting system over these former mentioned account? नहीं हर्षिस, बिल्कुल भी नहीं. आप गलत समझ रहे हो, आप बिल्कुल गलत समझ रहे हो, बिल्कुल टोटल गलत समझ रहे हो. आई वुड लाइक टू क्लैरिफाई. आप गलत समझ रहे हो इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि आपका डाउट ठीक नहीं है. योर डाउट इज प्रेटी जेन्युइन. योर डाउट इज समथिंग दैट आई एक्सपेक्ट दैट मे बी देयर. सी, द क्वेश्चन दैट हर्षिस इज आस्किंग इज दैट how are consolidated fund, contingency fund and public accounts mapped to these revenue, capital and current accounts? Or are these just subheadings of a program budgeting system over the former mentioned accounts? ये क्वेश्चन आपने क्यों पूछा है, बट पहले मैं आपको ये बता दूं, यू विल फील कंफर्टेबल. देखो, यू हैव रेड अबाउट करंट अकाउंट, कैपिटल अकाउंट इन योर बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट क्लास. Now you have read about revenue account and capital account in your budget class, government budgeting class. You have read about contingency fund, capital contingency fund of consolidated fund, public accounts in your polity classes. You have not spent enough time till now in understanding that these are very different things. You know these terms, and because these terms are very similar to each other, we have studied these terms in very same contexts. Therefore, our mind right now is not in a position to clearly distinguish and see what these terms, their meanings, their inferences are. And that is why हमारे दिमाग में जो सवाल आ रहा है, जो आपने पूछा है, वो सवाल इस वजह से है क्योंकि अभी ये सारी टर्म्स एकदम से बम्बार्ड हो गई हैं हमारे ऊपर. These terms have been bombarded at the same time on us, and we are unable to process these terms distinctly. It's completely okay, completely fine, perfectly fine, completely expected on your part to have such question. ठीक है? But do not worry, कोई चिंता की बात नहीं है. The question that you have asked is wrong. Wrong का मतलब वो question ठीक नहीं है, as in it reflects a wrong understanding. As I said, it's perfectly, completely expected. I don't expect you to know what revenue and capital account is after this class. You will have to spend some time reading, understanding, solving with examples. आप देखोगे, मैं आपसे सवाल पूछूंगा, I will ask you a question that which of the following is revenue expense? And when you apply your logic कि asset liability के ऊपर effect पड़ रहा है, हाँ तो capital otherwise revenue, expense है तो expense otherwise receipt है. जब आप इस चीज की प्रैक्टिस करोगे, then you will be able to understand better that what revenue expense, capital expenses, revenue budget, capital budget is. Then you will be able to understand. For now, I cannot expect you to answer these questions or understand things in totality. I try to explain things. I expect that you understand things, but you will be able to understand them better. मैंने बताया और आप समझ गए, वो अंडरस्टैंडिंग नहीं है. मैंने बताया, आप समझ गए और अब आप उसको रिटेन करके अप्लाई कर पा रहे हो, वो समझना है. उस चीज में टाइम लगेगा. इट टेक्स टाइम. डू नॉट वरी अबाउट इट. इट टेक्स टाइम. अब देखो, ऐसा है, दिस सब्जेक्ट इज नॉट, ये पॉलिटी सब्जेक्ट तो है नहीं, पॉलिटी या हिस्ट्री की तरह कि मैं आपको बताऊं कि भाई ये दो, ये दिस इज 1909 एक्ट. बताओ मॉडल रिफॉर्म में क्या था, क्वेश्चन दिखा दिया. व्हाट इज मॉडल रिफॉर्म, विच ऑफ द फॉलोइंग इज पार्ट ऑफ मॉडल रिफॉर्म. ऑप्शन में अभी भी मैंने मॉडल पढ़ाया और मैंने आपको बता दी ये ला मॉडल. या फिर दिस इज आर्टिकल 4, which of the following is fundamental rights. अब आपने देख लिया क्या है फंडामेंटल. अब सवाल तो वही पूछा जाएगा. This is a little bit different. The method of preparation is different. You need to have a broader understanding. So please be comfortable. Ask such questions even if they are wrong. Don't worry about it. Now let me answer your question. This is categorization of entire government statement of account. You prepare a statement of account. In that there are expenses and there are incomes. One way of categorizing, abhi humne dekha tha. Another way of categorizing same account which consists of incomes and expenses is rather to look at it in terms of expense and income. We look at in terms of revenue account and capital account. सरकार का पूरा कच्चा चिट्ठा, government's entire statement, government entire expenses and income in 1 year are now studied as part of revenue account and capital account. In revenue account, we study incomes on revenue account and expenses on revenue account. In capital account, incomes on capital account and expenses on capital account. Government's annual financial statement is being studied like this. This is revenue and capital, number one. Second, current account and capital account, वो हमने पढ़ा है balance of payments में. बीओपी का करंट एंड कैपिटल इसके करंट एंड कैपिटल से नहीं है. बीओपी अकाउंट क्या है, वो एक देश का अकाउंट है, ये गवर्नमेंट का अकाउंट है. डिफरेंस समझे. बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट इज द अकाउंट ऑफ अ कंट्रीज ट्रांजैक्शंस विद रेस्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड. इंडिया ट्रांजैक्ट्स विद रेस्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड दोज ट्रांजैक्शंस व्हिच परटेन टू our transactions with rest of the world, they are studied in our balance of payment account. How much money do we owe to rest of the world? How much money does rest of the world owe to us? How much have we purchased from rest of the world? How much has rest of the world bought from us? And those transactions of India, country with rest of the world are categorized as transactions on current account, transactions on capital account. इंडिया की ट्रांजैक्शंस करंट और कैपिटल अकाउंट पे सेग्रीगेट कर रहे हैं. यहां पे गवर्नमेंट की ट्रांजैक्शंस करंट और कैपिटल अकाउंट पे, रेवेन्यू और कैपिटल अकाउंट पे सेग्रीगेट कर रहे हैं. रेवेन्यू अकाउंट इज नॉट करंट अकाउंट. करंट अकाउंट मतलब क्या होता है, जो बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट में है, ट्रांजैक्शंस दैट आर सेटल्ड ऑन अ इमीडिएट बेसिस, डे टू डे बेसिस. सेटल्ड ट्रांजैक्शंस वो करंट अकाउंट का पार्ट है. ट्रांजैक्शंस विच हैव आउटस्टैंडिंग, विच हैव which are not settled at this moment, which are settled over a period of time, they are there in capital account. Transactions which are settled on a daily basis or on an immediate basis, they are current account. Transactions that have a time element associated with them, that they are going to be settled in some time, चाहे एक सेकंड में ही क्यों ना हो, but the transaction settles in some time, they are capital account. Investment, आपने इन्वेस्टमेंट किया, you expect to reap some benefit over a period of time, वो कैपिटल अकाउंट में है. वर्सेस आपने गुड्स खरीदे, उनके बदले में पेमेंट किया, इट इज नॉट क्रिएटिंग एनी फ्यूचर एक्शन. दैट ट्रांजैक्शन इज करंट अकाउंट. इंडिया पर आई परचेज मोबाइल फोन फ्रॉम यूएसए, इट इज अ करंट अकाउंट ट्रांजैक्शन. आई गॉट इन सम अमेरिकन पर्सन इन्वेस्टेड इन इंडिया, दैट इज अ कैपिटल अकाउंट ट्रांजैक्शन. यहां पे गवर्नमेंट के अकाउंट को कैसे हम सेग्रीगेट कर रहे हैं? एज रेवेन्यू एंड कैपिटल अकाउंट. ये डिस्टिंक्शन समझना जरूरी है. ये गवर्नमेंट का अकाउंट है, वो देश का अकाउंट है. थर्ड, कंसोलिडेटेड फंड, कंटिजेंसी फंड, पब्लिक अकाउंट्स ऑफ इंडिया. गवर्नमेंट्स मनी, गवर्नमेंट्स रेवेन्यू, सॉरी ये तो रेवेन्यू क्या, सॉरी, गवर्नमेंट्स इनकम्स on revenue account or capital account. Government receives money. Government receives taxes, government receives fines, government receives fees, government receives money when it provides stamp paper, sells stamp paper. Government receives money when it takes loan, government receives money when it sells some asset. Capital account पे कुछ पैसा आया, revenue account पे कुछ पैसा आया. वो पैसा जाता कहां है? जाता कहां है मतलब कहां पे जाके स्टोर होता है. गवर्नमेंट हैज सोल्ड एयर इंडिया, तो टाटास ने बोला हम 20,000 करोड़ रुपए देंगे. अब वो 20, मैंने किसी चीज को कुछ, मेरे को सैलरी मिली तो वो कहां आई? मेरे अकाउंट के अंदर आई. दैट इज रिसीव्ड इन माय अकाउंट. सो देयर इज अ अकाउंट फॉर रिसीविंग सैलरी. मुझे कोई प्रोफेशनल पेमेंट मिलती है, मान लो मैं लॉयर हूं एंड समबडी पेज सम प्रोफेशनल फीस टू मी, आई विल रिसीव अ प्रोफेशनल पेमेंट इन ल्यू ऑफ माई सर्विसेज. वो किस अकाउंट में आती है? यूजुअली बिजनेसेस का आपने सुना होगा, बिजनेसेस बैंक में एक चालू खाता चलाते हैं, करंट अकाउंट, वर्सेस सैलरीड पीपल अकाउंट बैंक में एक सेविंग्स अकाउंट चलाते हैं. वेयर डू आई रिसीव माई प्रोफेशनल पेमेंट वर्सेस वेयर डू आई रिसीव माई सैलरी? आई हैव गॉट अ करंट अकाउंट, आई हैव गॉट अ स्पेसिफिक अकाउंट फॉर दैट, चालू खाता, विच इज कॉल्ड करंट अकाउंट. अब मैं एक और करंट अकाउंट यहां पे इंट्रोड्यूस नहीं करना चाहता हूं. दिस इज करंट अकाउंट ऑफ अ बैंक वर्सेज माई सैलरी अकाउंट, माई सेविंग्स अकाउंट. सरकार जब पैसा रिसीव करती है, व्हेन गवर्नमेंट रिसीव्स मनी, वेयर डज दैट मनी गो? डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ मनीज गो इन डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ अकाउंट्स. मनी रिसीव्ड ऑन रेवेन्यू अकाउंट, मनी रिसीव्ड इन कैपिटल अकाउंट, these monies go into different account, are received into different types of accounts. खाता, यहां पे खाते की बात कर रहे हैं. These monies are received in different types of accounts. So for example, taxes which the government collects, article 112, वो कहां पे जाते हैं? वो एक अकाउंट में जाते हैं जिसका नाम है कंसोलिडेटेड फंड ऑफ इंडिया. कंटिजेंसी, सरकार ने कहीं पे पैसा रिसीव किया और उसको एक कंटिजेंसी के लिए सेट असाइड कर दिया. Government receives money and it sets aside some money in form of that we will need to spend it when some contingency arises. तो वो सरकार ने पैसा रख दिया contingency account के अंदर. Public accounts, government receives some money which is not its own, but it receives it as a matter of trustee. Government receives money which is not its own money, but it receives it as a matter of trustee. मेरा पेंशन का पैसा है, पेंशन प्रोविडेंट फंड, मेरा प्रोविडेंट फंड का, पेंशन फंड का पैसा है. Whose money is it? It is my money. मेरे को बिलोंग करता है वो. पेंशन फंड किसका है? प्रोविडेंट फंड में पैसा किसका है? मेरा है. मेरा एक पेंशन फंड अकाउंट खुला है या मेरा एक प्रोविडेंट फंड अकाउंट खुला है. In that provident fund account, I deposit 50,000 rupees every year. मेरा एनपीएस में, नेशनल पेंशन स्कीम में 50,000 रुपए मैं हर साल जमा करता हूं. Whose money is that? That is my money. It belongs to me, not to anybody else. It belongs to me. Owner of that money is me. Where is that money deposited? In my pension account with NPS, National Pension Scheme. Who operates National Pension Scheme? Government of India operates National Pension Scheme. I will get that money once I turn 60. 60 से पहले भी मैं निकाल सकता हूं, बट कुछ कंडीशंस हैं. मेरा पैसा मैंने सरकार को दिया. My money I gave to the government. And I am saying that I will withdraw this money once I turn 60. इसका मतलब जब तक मैं 60 साल का होता हूं तब तक मेरा पैसा किसके पास है? सरकार के पास है. मनी इज माइन बट इट इज देयर विद द गवर्नमेंट. Until I turn 60, government can utilize it in any manner that it wants. Once I turn 60, I would want that money back. Is this money mine or government's? My money. Who is having access to this money? Me or government? Government has access to this money. Has government asked me for this money? सरकार ने मेरे को बोला कि आप पैसा जमा करो, नहीं, मैंने अपनी मर्जी से जमा किया है. गवर्नमेंट ने तो मेरे को फोर्स नहीं किया था, बट मैंने सरकार में ट्रस्ट करते हुए, कीपिंग ट्रस्ट इन द गवर्नमेंट दैट कीप दिस मनी, पे मी सम इंटरेस्ट आफ्टर व्हेन आई टर्न 60, टिल आई टर्न 60, use this money in whatever way you want. Did government ask this money from me? No, it did not. Have I paid money to the government? Yes, I have. To whom does it belong to? To me. Who is utilizing this money? Government. This money goes into what is called as public accounts of India. Money received by government, but there is some speciality associated with this money. स्पेशल फीचर क्या है कि ये सरकार ने रिसीव तो किया है लेकिन सरकार का है नहीं. मनी इज स्टोर्ड इन व्हाट इज कॉल्ड एज पब्लिक अकाउंट्स ऑफ इंडिया. सो वेर यू रिसीव मनी, डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ मनी यू कीप इन डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ अकाउंट. बेस्ड ऑन योर रिक्वायरमेंट यू कीप सम मनी इन कंटिजेंसी अकाउंट, कंटिजेंसी फंड, कंसोलिडेटेड फंड, पब्लिक अकाउंट्स ऑफ इंडिया. ठीक है, इट्स कंप्लीटली एक्सेप्टेबल फॉर यू टू आस्क सच क्वेश्चंस. देखो, आपको बताया होगा कंटिजेंसी फंड, कैपिटल अकाउंट, करंट अकाउंट और फलाने निकाले 50-60 और जितने भी नाम लिए, पब्लिक अकाउंट्स, ऑल दीज थिंग्स दे हैव बीन टॉट टू यू, सम बाय मी, सम बाय अदर फैकल्टीज, बट आई नो इट्स डिफिकल्ट फॉर अस टू लिंक देम व्हेन वी सी देम. इतने सारे नाम और सब सेम कॉन्टेक्स्ट में पढ़े तो कंफ्यूजन होगा ही होगा. अच्छा आपने पूछा, अब शायद कंफ्यूजन नहीं होगा. चलो नेक्स्ट सवाल. This is in reference to Paytm news. What was meant by the term the retail portion was subscribed 1.6 times? आसान चीज है. Retail portion was subscribed 1.6 times का मतलब क्या है? This is something that would be covered, either would have been covered or would be covered in your capital markets class. I'll just बहुत आसान चीज है, मैं 1 मिनट में बताता हूँ. Paytm का IPO आया अभी, उससे पहले मतलब कई सारी कंपनीज का IPO आता ज्यादा रह रहा है. IPO, इनिशियल पब्लिक ऑफरिंग. Paytm is a company, till few days back it was a private company. Now it is a public company. Private company थी मतलब the shares of the company were privately held versus public company. The shares of the company, share मतलब ownership, the shares of the company are publicly available to be held. Privately held मतलब only the person whom I want to sell, only that person can access to that share. अगर मेरे पास पेटीएम की होल्डिंग है, अभी तक कंपनी पब्लिक नहीं हुई है, कंपनी हैज नॉट वेंट पब्लिक टिल नाउ, इफ आई हैव सम होल्डिंग इन पेटीएम, ओनली दैट पर्सन कैन बी गिवन दी होल्डिंग टू whom आई वांट. जिसको मैं चाहता हूं केवल मैं उसी को दे सकता हूं. प्राइवेटली हेल्ड कंपनी. लार्ज नंबर ऑफ पीपल कैन होल्ड पार्ट ऑफ दैट कंपनी. 50 लोग हैं, 50 लोगों के पास थोड़े थोड़े पेटीएम के शेयर हैं, लेकिन वो 50 लोग जिसमें को चाहें, वो 50 लोग जिसको चाहेंगे केवल उसी को पेटीएम का शेयर मिल सकता है. प्राइवेटली हेल्ड कंपनी वर्सेस पब्लिकली हेल्ड. पब्लिकली हेल्ड मतलब अगर मुझे पेटीएम का शेयर खरीदना है, मैं मार्केट में जाऊंगा, देखूंगा क्या दाम है पेटीएम के शेयर का और मैं परचेस कर लूंगा. नोबडी इज देयर टू डिनाई मी माई राइट टू बाय दिस पेटीएम शेयर. आई विल बाय पेटीएम शेयर बिकॉज आई वॉन्ट दैट शेयर. Publicly held company, public has a right to buy shares in that, to buy shares, to trade in the shares of that company. Public versus private. When a company goes public, जब कंपनी पब्लिक होती है, मतलब अब प्राइवेटली हेल्ड से कंपनी पब्लिक होने जा रही है, उसके लिए कंपनी आईपीओ लेके आती है. कंपनी ब्रिंग्स एन आईपीओ व्हेन इट गोज पब्लिक. When it goes public, the existing owners of the share, existing owners of the company, they decide to make some part of their privately held shares as public. मेरे पास पेटीएम के 500 शेयर्स थे और मैंने बोला अब इन 500 में से 100 शेयर्स को मैं पब्लिक कर रहा हूं. इज दिस क्लियर? The existing owners, the existing shareholders of the company decide some part of their privately held holdings, some part of the private holdings will now become publicly available. This is what happens essentially when a company becomes public. When a company becomes public, when owners, existing owners decide that they want to part away with some of their shares, they decide that how will these shares become public, कैसे दिए जाएंगे shares बाकी लोगों को, पब्लिक को, कोट एंड कोट पब्लिक को कैसे दिए जाएंगे. तो जब वो डिसाइड करते हैं कि कैसे दिए जाएंगे, तो वो कोटा बनाते हैं अलग अलग कैटेगरीज का. दे मेक अ कोटा ऑफ डिफरेंट कैटेगरीज. लेट्स से 100 shares of Paytm are going to be made public. 100 शेयर पेटीएम के पब्लिक होने वाले हैं. तो एग्जिस्टिंग ओनर्स क्या डिसाइड करेंगे? दे विल मेक अ कोटा ऑफ हु विल गेट एक्सेस टू दीज 100 शेयर्स. यूजुअली देयर आर 3 categories. One category is institutions. Second category is HNIs, high net worth individuals. Third category is individuals, retailers, retail owners, retail investors. 100 shares, some part of the share will be reserved for each category. 100 शेयर पब्लिक होने वाले हैं, तो 100 में से आप बोलोगे 30 शेयर, 30 shares are received, are reserved. 30 shares are reserved for institutions. म्यूचुअल फंड, फॉरेन इंस्टीट्यूशंस, LIC, किसी को भी इन्वेस्ट करना है, बैंक को इन्वेस्ट करना है. 30 शेयर्स आर रिजर्व्ड फॉर इंस्टीट्यूशंस. 30 shares are reserved for high net worth individual. People who are high net worth, they will purchase these 30 shares. Remaining 40 shares will be available for retail investors. जो ना हाई नेटवर्थ इंडिविजुअल हैं, ना ही इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं, उनके लिए 40 शेयर का कोटा है. समझ में आई बात? Now, when Paytm opens its IPO, when Paytm opens its share to be held publicly, every category of people will apply. मान रिटेल कैटेगरी के लिए कितने शेयर हैं? 40 अवेलेबल हैं. 40 शेयर आर टू बी गिवन टू रिटेल कैटेगरी. लेकिन जब अप्लाई करने की बारी आई, when people expressed interest, 40 were available, but 100 expressed their interest. 100 लोगों ने अपना इंटरेस्ट जाहिर किया कि मैं खरीदना चाहता हूं. 40 shares were available for retail category, but 100 people showed up. 100 people have given their application that I want to subscribe, I want to subscribe, I want to subscribe. You will say that the retail portion has been subscribed 2.5 times. 40 अवेलेबल थे, 100 ने एप्लीकेशन लगा दी, तो रिटेल पोर्शन 2.5 गुना डिमांड है एज कंपेयर टू व्हाट देयर सप्लाई इज. दिस इज मेंट बाय 1.5 2.5 टाइम्स सब्सक्रिप्शन. ठीक है, चलो नेक्स्ट. पमीर का क्वेश्चन है, if government invests in creation of assets abroad, will it be considered as capital expenditure even if asset is not in the government? Example, expenditure in building Afghanistan Parliament complex. Good that you asked, and I'll continue our discussion from this point only. तो हमने डिस्कस किया गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंस कैपिटल क्या है, रेवेन्यू क्या है, कैपिटल रिसीट रेवेन्यू रिसीट क्या है. हमने अलग अलग एग्जांपल्स के साथ इसको डिस्कस किया. एट द सेम टाइम what we did was we tried to clearly define that something is in capital account and what is not there is in revenue account. हमने ये define किया. But at the same time, there are issues that arise when it comes to distinguishing is it capital or revenue. There would be many instances where it will become difficult for us to categorize that whether the expense is capital or revenue. One of those instances, as you have pointed out, is if government builds parliament building in Afghanistan, government builds a football stadium in Palestine, creation of an asset, yes, but is it capital or revenue? इंडिया में तो वो एसेट क्रिएट नहीं हुआ है, it has been created abroad. तो बताओ कि ये कैपिटल, is it capital part or is it revenue part? आंसर मैं आपको बता देता हूं. आंसर इज दैट इट इज रेवेन्यू पार्ट. आंसर इज दैट इट इज नॉट कैपिटल, इट इज रेवेन्यू. अब मैं आंसर एक्सप्लेन कर देता हूं पहले. आंसर इज दैट दिस टाइप ऑफ एक्सपेंडिचर, अफगानिस्तान में पार्लियामेंट बिल्डिंग क्रिएट हुई है, पैलेस्टीन में फुटबॉल स्टेडियम क्रिएट हुआ है, ऑल दिस इज रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंस ऑफ गवर्नमेंट, नॉट कैपिटल एक्सपेंस. If we understand what is an asset, then we shall be able to reasonably mark a right answer for this statement. Asset क्या है? Asset is something which is expected to generate benefit for you. You build a road, it is expected to generate some benefit for you. You build a company, it is expected to generate some profits or dividends for you. That is what an asset is. You build a parliament building in Afghanistan. Yes, there is some expected benefit. There is going to be goodwill between people of Afghanistan and people of India. Goodwill between government of Afghanistan and government of India. Same if you build a football stadium in Palestine, then it is going to अटक गया क्या फिर से? हाँ? If audio is fine, so please let me continue. चलो हो गया, अब ठीक हो गया. I'm seeing, मेरे को दिख रहा है. अब हो गया ठीक. The answer to the question is that it is part of revenue budget, not capital budget. It is revenue expense, not capital expense. Is there a benefit that you seek to reap from building a parliament building in Afghanistan? Yes. Bonhomie between the people of the two countries. Yes. But as far as financial benefit is concerned, financial benefit is a little bit uncertain. Financial benefit होगा नहीं होगा वो थोड़ा uncertain part है. You don't invest, please mind it. Statement is coming. You do not invest in building parliament in Afghanistan with expectation of earning revenue from that building. उस particular building से कोई revenue नहीं आने वाला है. फुटबॉल स्टेडियम जो आप बिल्ड कर रहे हो, उस फुटबॉल स्टेडियम से कोई रेवेन्यू नहीं आने वाला है. सो प्रिसाइसली फ्रॉम दैट पर्टिकुलर एसेट विच यू हैव क्रिएटेड, नो एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ रेवेन्यू और नो रेवेन्यू इज गोइंग टू बी देयर. दैट इज हाउ वी कैन आंसर सच क्वेश्चंस कि वहां पे बनाया है तो क्या वो एसेट है या नहीं है, क्या वो कैपिटल पार्ट है या नहीं है. नहीं, वो कैपिटल पार्ट में नहीं है. अब सिंपल आंसर मैं इसका देता हूं. सिंपल आंसर इज गवर्नमेंट्स ग्रांट्स टू अदर कंट्रीज आर नॉट पार्ट, गवर्नमेंट ग्रांट्स टू अदर कंट्रीज आर पार्ट ऑफ रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंस. व्हेन गवर्नमेंट गिव्स रेवेन्यू, government gives grants to any other country, they are part of revenue expenses. With that grant, the country may choose to do whatever it wants to do. The country may seek a grant for building parliament building. The country may seek a grant for building a football stadium. Grant is being used to create some capital asset, but that is a grant first. And therefore grants are part of revenue budget. ये तो एक एग्जाम्पल हो गया. और कॉम्प्लेक्स एग्जांपल देता हूं जो आपको घर पे सोच के आना है. आई विल नॉट टेल यू आंसर फॉर दिस क्वेश्चन, यू हैव टू थिंक अबाउट इट, सर्च एंड थिंक अबाउट इट. डिफेंस एक्सपेंडिचर ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट. सरकार ने एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर खरीदा, ये सरकार ने रफेल जहाज खरीदे. गवर्नमेंट बायज एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर, गवर्नमेंट बायज रफेल एयरक्राफ्ट. टेल मी, इज दैट रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंस और कैपिटल एक्सपेंस? डोंट आंसर द क्वेश्चन नाउ, answer the question in next class. Question should be clear to everybody. Expenditure that government incurs in buying an aircraft carrier or buying a big tank or buying a big gun or buying a Rafale aircraft, is that expense a revenue expense or capital expense? Do not answer that question, this question now. Deliberate upon this question. I want reason, I don't want answer कि क्यों capital है, क्यों revenue है. एक word में answer मुझे नहीं चाहिए. Give answer in next class with 1-2 lines justification of why is it capital or why is it revenue. अभी आंसर मत देना. Why is interest part of revenue whereas loan is part of capital? Loan creates liability. Liability कितनी है? आपने borrow किया, you have borrowed 1,000 crore rupees. How much do you have to return? You have to return 1,000 crore that you have borrowed. On that 1,000 crores, you have to pay an interest of 10 crores every month. 10 crores of interest that you have to pay, that is not your liability. Liability is the loan. 10 crores is your duty. 10 crore पे करना आपकी ड्यूटी है, 1,000 करोड़ आपकी लाइबिलिटी है. गवर्नमेंट स्टाफ को सैलरी पे करनी है, यू हैव टू पे सैलरी टू द गवर्नमेंट स्टाफ. इज द सैलरी दैट यू पे टू गवर्नमेंट स्टाफ योर लाइबिलिटी? आपकी जिम्मेदारी तो है, आपको सरकारी स्टाफ को पेमेंट करनी है, बट क्या हम उसको लाइबिलिटी की तरह देखेंगे या क्या हम उसको ड्यूटी की तरह देखेंगे? You have employed them, therefore it is your duty to pay salary to them. You have taken a loan, therefore it is your duty to pay interest on that loan. You have to pay back the capital, you have to pay back the principal amount. When you pay back the principal amount, then your liability reduces. Interest still remains. Interest you have to now pay on lesser amount than before. Subtle difference. Good question that you asked. मैंने लिखवाया भी था, but it helps me to clarify. Anything that has bearing on capital and revenue account? I think I have answered Riya this question now. When government spends on welfare program, does that come under revenue expense? And when government spends on skill development that results in human capital formation, which can be treated as an asset, will it be counted as capital or revenue expense? ये सब वही examples हैं जो मैं expect कर रहा हूं आपसे. I want you to ask these questions so that things get more clear. सरकार ने किसी स्कीम पे पैसा खर्च किया. अभी स्कीम के बारे में आंसर डिस्कस कर लेते हैं. स्कीम 2 मिनट में आ जाएगी जब मैं प्लान नॉन प्लान बताऊंगा. तो 5 मिनट के अंदर आई विल एक्सप्लेन प्लान नॉन प्लान, देन स्कीम्स विल कम. ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट के ऊपर पैसा एक्सपेंडिचर किया. गवर्नमेंट स्पेंड्स मनी ऑन ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट, स्किल डेवलपमेंट के ऊपर, सो दैट ह्यूमन एसेट्स आर क्रिएटेड, ह्यूमन रिसोर्स इज क्रिएटेड और ह्यूमन कैपिटल इज क्रिएटेड. When government spends money on skill development, is it capital or is it revenue? It is completely revenue. ह्यूमन कैपिटल पे सरकार ने पैसा खर्च किया है, दैट इज मनी स्पेंट as a matter of performance of its duty. Asset is created, but that asset is not going to benefit government only. That asset will benefit the society. सरकार के लिए वो एसेट नहीं है. सरकार के लिए एसेट वही है जो कि एक फाइनेंशियल नजरिए से एसेट की तरह देखा जा सकता है. Asset for the government is only that asset which can be looked at as an asset from financial point of view. Road is something that an asset of a government, that is an asset of the government. Roads are created by the government, or government spends money in construction of roads. When government spends money in construction of road, government expects to reap some benefit from that. उसका भी डिटेल्ड एक्सप्लेनेशन है जो कि अभी मैं प्लान नॉन प्लान में लेके आऊंगा. Just wait for some time, more things will get more confusing and then clear. National monetization pipeline comes under capital receipt or not? इसका आंसर मैं थोड़ी देर में देता हूं. नेशनल मॉनेटाइजेशन पाइपलाइन का ये आंसर आप अपने आप भी सोच सकते हो. नेशनल मॉनेटाइजेशन पाइपलाइन, अभी रुको इस चीज के बारे में. दिस इज समथिंग दैट यू कैन पॉन्डर अपॉन योरसेल्फ. You will be able to. Let me explain plan, non-plan. Then all such confusions will get more deep and then clear. उसके बाद clear होंगे. The confusion which is there, which is naturally there, in not just your mind, it is still there in my mind also. Even I cannot answer all such questions with certainty. Even today I cannot answer these questions with certainty, whether some expense will be capital or some expense will be revenue. I may know the answer, and by knowing the answer I may justify. But at the end of the day, there would be some areas where even I would be confused, or I would not be certain whether that expense is revenue or capital. Further, this confusion gets even bigger when we go into classification of plan and non-plan. Revenue और capital में confusion और बड़ा हो जाएगा जब हम प्लान नॉन प्लान में जाएंगे. रेवेन्यू और कैपिटल का क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ सम एक्सपेंस, लेट्स कंसीडर एक्सपेंस, क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ सम एक्सपेंस एज वेदर रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंस और कैपिटल एक्सपेंस इज फार मोर सर्टेन. देयर इज अ फार मोर क्लैरिटी दैट वेदर एन एक्सपेंस इज रेवेन्यू और कैपिटल एज कंपेयर टू वेदर एन एक्सपेंस इज प्लान और नॉन प्लान. रेवेन्यू में काफी हद तक क्लैरिटी है. टू अ वेरी लार्ज, टू अ वेरी ब्रॉड एक्सटेंट देयर इज क्लैरिटी वेदर एन एक्सपेंस इज रेवेन्यू और कैपिटल. व्हेन वी स्ट्रेच द बाउंड्री, व्हेन वी ट्राई टू सी वेदर समथिंग इज एन एसेट और नॉट, समथिंग बिहेव्स और इट लुक्स लाइक एन एसेट, वर्सेस व्हेन वी आर नॉट श्योर वेदर इट इज एन एसेट और नॉट, only then there is some confusion in your mind. रोड है मान लो, अब रोड एसेट में काउंट करूं कि नहीं करूं? शुड आई काउंट एक्सपेंडिचर ऑन कंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ रोड एज एन एसेट? रोड से अज्यूम कर लेते हैं सरकार टोल नहीं कमा रही है. Let us assume it is not an highway or an expressway on which government is earning a toll. Let us assume it is a road constructed in a village area under प्रधानमंत्री ग्राम सड़क योजना. अब प्रधानमंत्री ग्राम सड़क योजना में एक रोड कंस्ट्रक्ट करी, क्या वो एसेट है या क्या वो एसेट नहीं है? Is government earning a toll? No. Is farmer paying some charge on taking his produce on that road? No. Whether it's an asset or not, confusing. लगता तो है एसेट है, लेकिन लग नहीं रहा कुछ, लेकिन कुछ इनकम तो हो नहीं रही एसेट से. You buy a car, government purchases a car so that its officers can travel or its workers can travel. अब गाड़ी परचेज करी सरकार ने, अब वो गाड़ी एसेट है सरकार का या फिर रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंस है सरकार का? If we try to think about it, car is my asset. Cars are classified as an asset, or we think of our cars as an asset. Is buying a car for traveling of your officer leading to generation of some income? No. Then whether it's an asset or not? The confusion arises when we are not certain about what is an asset. Only then we think whether it's capital or revenue. जहां तक कंपनी की बात है, मान लो गवर्नमेंट सेट्स अप अ कंपनी, गवर्नमेंट बायज मोर शेयर इन स्टेट बैंक ऑफ इंडिया, वहां पे तो कोई कंफ्यूजन नहीं है दैट यस एन एसेट हैज बीन क्रिएटेड और गवर्नमेंट्स एसेट्स हैव इंक्रीज्ड. कोई कंफ्यूजन नहीं है वहां पे दैट यस इट इज सर्टेनली कैपिटल एक्सपेंस. व्हेन गवर्नमेंट पेज बैक पार्ट ऑफ इट्स लोन, कोई कंफ्यूजन नहीं है दैट लायबिलिटी हैज बीन रिड्यूस्ड, इट इज सर्टेनली अ कैपिटल एक्सपेंस. When government pays a salary to its employees, कोई confusion नहीं है that yes, there is no effect, no bearing on assets and liabilities. It is part of revenue. Government pays pension, no bearing on assets and liabilities. There is no confusion that whether it's revenue or capital, it is certain that it is revenue. कोई confusion नहीं है. लेकिन हाँ, extreme cases में जैसे हम जाने लगते हैं, extreme cases mean that where we are confused whether the expense is actually incurred in creation of some asset or not, then it seems that the distinction becomes doubtful. Whether buying Rafale aircraft for country security, is it an asset or not? Country का तो asset है, सरकार तो उसको asset की तरह classify करेगी. Now, is it capital expense or is it revenue expense? अब उससे कहीं income तो हो नहीं रही है, country को security मिल रही है. एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर परचेज किया है, इतना बड़ा 2000 करोड़ का एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर परचेज कर लिया आपने. यू परचेज इट, वेदर इट्स एन एसेट और नॉट यू डोंट नो. व्हाई? बिकॉज फाइनेंशियल टर्म्स में इट बिकम्स अ लिटिल बिट डिफिकल्ट टू सी इट एज एन एसेट. In financial terms, it becomes difficult to visualize a Rafale aircraft or an aircraft carrier as an asset. A gun, Bofors gun has been procured. Is it an asset? You may say that it is an asset for defense forces. But as far as accounting is concerned, यहां तो हम बजट बना रहे हैं ना, हम बजट बना रहे हैं, तो as far as accounting is concerned, it is a little bit dicey. It is a little bit confusing whether this thing is an asset, can be categorized as an asset or not. I want you to deliberate upon this. But largely speaking, our distinction of revenue and capital account is very certain. It is only in some extreme cases that the distinction becomes difficult to see. Let's look at plan non-plan distinction and realize even greater mess lies here. Even a bigger mess lies here in plan non-plan distinction. What is plan and non-plan distinction? Let me tell you. Planning का part आपकी क्लास में हो चुका है. Planning portion has been done. Planning different plans, planning क्या था, planned economy, all these things have been done in your class. I think the last part with respect to Niti Aayog, that is the only thing that remains. Plan क्या है, ये आप सब लोगों को आज की तारीख में पता है that what plan is. 5-year plan क्या होते हैं. What is plan expenditure? What is non-plan expenditure? Article 112 says that government is required. Article 112 says that government is required to distinguish expenses ऑन रेवेन्यू अकाउंट एंड कैपिटल अकाउंट. प्लीज ध्यान से सुनना, यही लास्ट चीज हम डिस्कस करेंगे आज. इसके बाद फिस्कल डेफिसिट्स में आई हैड टू टीच डेफिसिट्स टुडे बट इट्स ओके. क्वेश्चंस इन दिस टॉपिक आर एक्सपेक्टेड एंड आई वाज प्रिपेयर्ड फॉर कि आप लोग कई सारे सवाल पूछोगे. लेकिन ये प्लान नॉन प्लान वाला आज कर लेंगे, ये हम आज नहीं, इसको हम नहीं छोड़ सकते. इट विल टेक अस अबाउट 15 मिनट्स टू डिस्कस दिस प्लान नॉन प्लान डिस्टिंक्शन. प्लीज ध्यान से सुनना, सब लोग प्लीज ध्यान लगा के सुनो कि प्लान नॉन प्लान क्या है. आर्टिकल 112 says that government has to distinguish its expenses into revenue and other accounts. So constitutional requirement is that you distinguish between revenue and other accounts. When government has to present budget in the parliament, it is constitutionally required that government distinguish expenses on revenue and other account, other which has come to be understood as capital. It is constitutionally required to separate expenses on revenue and other account. Versus the governments also used to present the expenses with one more classification. Requirement of constitution is to classify expenses as revenue and other. Governments also used to present expenses with one more classification, which was plan and non-plan classification. Government used to classify, while presenting budget, the expenses into planned expenses and non-planned expenses. So much so that planned and non-planned classification was the major classification that we used to look forward to in the budget. Constitutional requirement is revenue and cap. I am not going to dictate this because this has been abandoned, but still I am going to tell you what plan non-plan is. I'll tell you the reasons, you will understand the reasons yourself, लेकिन ये मैं dictate नहीं करूंगा, मैं पहले ही बता दे रहा हूं आपको. Plan and non-plan, governments also used to distinguish expenses on plan and non-plan as plan and non-plan expenses. So much so that the major classification of the budget, people used to look forward to the plan non-plan classification. Media used to report the plan and non-plan classification. Revenue and capital classification was not very prominent. It was reported because it was constitutional requirement, but otherwise nobody paid attention to revenue and capital classification. The major classification that government used was plan and non-plan classification. While presenting budget, while reading the budget speech in the parliament, the finance minister would repeatedly emphasize on plan and non-plan expenditure. Revenue and capital were sidelined as simply accounting exercise mandated because of constitution. I'll repeat, while presenting the budget in the parliament, all finance ministers of the past used to emphasize about plan and non-plan expense rather than revenue and capital expense. Revenue and capital expense was presented because there was constitutional requirement. It was presented simply because there was a constitutional mandate. केवल एक अकाउंटिंग तरीका, अकाउंटिंग का जरिया था और कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ने कहा था, इसीलिए आप जबरदस्ती उसको प्रेजेंट करते थे. लेकिन फोकस सारा आपका होता था प्लान एंड नॉन प्लान के ऊपर. समझ में आया क्या प्लान नॉन प्लान की कहानी रही है पास्ट में? Let's understand what plan non-plan is. The definition of planned expenditure is very simple. Always stick to this definition. Any expense which is incurred by the government as part of the 5-year plan which is ongoing right now is called planned expense. There would be a 5-year plan which is ongoing. You are presenting a budget in the year 2005. 2005 में आप budget present कर रहे हो. The 10th plan is running at that time. Between 2002 to 2007, 10th plan is running. Since 10th plan is ongoing in 2005, government will incur expenses according to what is mentioned in the 10th plan. 10th प्लान में लिखा है कि सरकार को इन इन चीजों पे इतना एक्सपेंस करना है अगले 5 साल में. इन 5 years गवर्नमेंट हैज टू स्पेंड this much money on these items. Based on what is written in the ongoing plan, government will prepare the budget. प्लान डॉक्यूमेंट में तो लिखा है कि आपको इस पे खर्च करना है, लेकिन बजट तो सरकार की discretionary exercise hai. Discretionary as in government will decide how much money to allocate. However, since it is written in plan that you have to do this much expense on this scheme, whatever expense you incur on schemes, on programs that are part of the existing 5-year plan, all those expenses become planned expenses. Expenses for which you have planned for are plan expenses. What I mean when I say what you have planned for means which are part of the 5-year plan. Expenses which are not part of 5-year plan are non-plan expense. समझ में आया डिस्टिंक्शन क्या है प्लान नॉन प्लान का? जो प्लान डॉक्यूमेंट में लिखा है, the expense which is written in the plan document is called plan expense. The expense which is not written in the plan document is called non-plan expense. In 2005, government presents the budget. In that budget, government will classify its expenses as plan expenses and non-plan expenses. What will be there in plan expenses? Anything which finds mention in this 5-year plan, in the ongoing, जो 5-year plan उस समय चल रहा है, anything that finds mention in the ongoing 5-year plan will be part of plan expense. Anything which is not there in 5-year plan but government incurs an expense on that will be part of non-plan expense. ये तो simple distinction हुआ plan non-plan का. यहां पे तो कोई confusion नहीं होना चाहिए that what is plan, what is non-plan. अब confusion introduce करने की बारी आई है. Let's now introduce some kind of confusion. Not confusion but complexity. Not confusion, complexity. Plan, non-plan. Plan and non-plan. Plan versus non-plan. पता चलेगा आपको कि क्यों हमने इसको अबैंडन किया. Any expense which is part of ongoing plan, planned expenditure in this year's budget. Any expense in this year's budget which is not part of the ongoing plan is non-plan expense in this year's budget. Now let's see. Plan expense is that which is part of this year's, which is part of the ongoing plan, 5-year plan. The ongoing 5-year plan, ongoing 5-year plan, FYP. Expense which is there in the ongoing 5-year plan will be synonymous, will be deemed as developmental expenditure. Developmental expenditure. 5-year plan में लिखा है, in the 5-year plan it is written that we have to improve. Objective क्या लिखा है? Improve literacy rate. Improve literacy rate to 90% for the country. Next, ये objective, ये target लिखा है 5-year plan में. You have to improve literacy rate to 90%. This is the target which is written. Second line में लिखा है, in order to improve literacy rate, in order to achieve literacy rate of 90%, we have to set up 1 lakh schools in the country. 1 lakh schools set up करने हैं. In order to improve literacy rate to 90%, you have to set up 1 lakh schools in the country. 1 lakh schools in the country. ये हम plan document की बात करेंगे. I'm talking about what is written in the 5-year plan. In order to set up 1 lakh schools in the country, plan document इस तरीके से detailed होगा. In order to set up 1 lakh schools in the country, government needs 1 lakh crore rupees of expenditure to be incurred in next 5 years. अगले 5 साल में. Let's realize what is written here. The 5-year plan says that in the next 5 years, we need to improve literacy rate to 90%. In order to improve our literacy rate to 90%, we need to set up 1 lakh schools. In order to set up 1 lakh schools, we need to incur an expense of 1 lakh crore in these 5 years. In these 5 years, this 1 lakh crore is going to be spent like this. In year 1, you spend 10,000 crores. एक साल, पहले साल में आप 10,000 crores spend करते हो. In year 2, you spend 10,000 crores. In year 3, you spend 20,000 crores. In year 4, in year 5, you spend some amount. This is how you plan to spend money in next 5 years. Year 3 में, year 4 में 30,000 crore रुपए spend करते हो, कितना बचा? 30, 50 और 20, 70. Year 5 में 30,000 crore spend करते हो. Let's say this is what your 5-year plan says that you have to spend money in next 5 years so that your literacy rate increases to 90%, for which you require to set up 1 lakh schools. This is how 1 lakh crore is going to be spent in next 5 years according to this 5-year plan. अब ये 5-year plan 2002 में आया और ये 2002 में बनके निकल लिया. अब 2005 में, in 2005, government is presenting the budget. Government says that in 2005, when they are presenting the budget, government said that budget allocation for this, इसका नाम देते हैं लिटरेसी मिशन. लिटरेसी, इसका नाम देते हैं लिटरेसी मिशन, सर्व शिक्षा अभियान या लिटरेसी मिशन, कुछ भी हम इसका नाम देते हैं. This is literacy mission as proposed by 5-year plan. Budget allocation for the literacy mission, for year 2005 is 40,000 crores. 40,000 करोड़ रुपए इस साल का बजट एलोकेशन है. प्लान में तो ये लिखा था, प्लान में ये लिखा है that this is how you have to spend. अब एक्चुअल में गवर्नमेंट कैसे स्पेंड करेगी? इट इज गवर्नमेंट्स डिस्क्रेशन. When government presents budget in 2005, in the 2005 budget, government says that allocation for this literacy mission, which is part of this 5-year plan, in this year 2005 is 40,000 crores. तो अब ये 40,000 करोड़ रुपए क्या हुआ? ये planned expense का part बन के आ गया. When government presents its budget, in planned expense, there would be one heading, literacy mission. In literacy mission, the expenditure would be 40,000 crores. The expenditure on this literacy mission, which is part of planned expense, is synonymous with developmental expense. ये developmental expense है. It is synonymous with developmental expense. Now, any government which prepares the budget, any government when it prepares the budget, its objective would be to be seen as, please mark the words carefully, its objective would be to be seen as the government which is doing lot of developmental expense. सरकार का ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या होगा? कि दिखना चाहिए कि हम बहुत सारा डेवलपमेंटल एक्सपेंस कर रहे हैं. Government's objective would be to be seen as doing a lot of developmental expense. Any government will have this objective कि हमारा बजट जब हम प्रेजेंट करें, whenever we present the budget, the coverage in media should be this, that budget has lot of developmental expense. Developmental expense of the government is 20% more than last year, 50% more than previous government. Every government would want to achieve this target, to show as much developmental expense or to show as much planned expense in their budget as possible. So much so, governments, what they will do is, they will do accounting jugglery. Governments, they will perform some sort of jugglery in the accounts, adjust numbers from here and there. They will do this adjustment so that planned expenditure increases. some non-developmental expense may be categorized as planned expense. Therefore, your planned expense will look big in value. Hence, you will be deemed as spending more on development. सरकार क्या करेगी? सरकार ऐसा एक्सपेंस जो कि डेवलपमेंटल नहीं है, ऐसा एक्सपेंस जो कि आइडियली नॉन प्लान पार्ट में होना चाहिए था, गवर्नमेंट विल ट्राई टू reclassify that expense using some creative accounting techniques into planned expense so that your planned expense looks big. And since planned expense is synonymous with developmental expense, the government will get good press coverage that government is spending a lot on developmental aspects. In reality, expenditure on developmental aspects is less, but what is shown is very big. Let me give you an example. With example this would be more clear. Example के बाद class खत्म कर दूंगा. Example is, let's continue with the example of this literacy mission, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. In this literacy mission, plan says, आपका जो plan है वो plan बोलता है that you need to construct you need to set up 1 lakh school. 1 लाख स्कूल बनाने हैं आपको. अब 1 लाख स्कूल बनाने हैं. There are various aspects related with setting up of schools. One aspect is creating infra. That is actual setting up of schools. Second aspect is maintenance of that school. Maintenance and running of that school. You need to create infra, plus you need to maintain and run that school continuously. For this, you require, for example, paying salary to teachers or other staff, teacher or staff. अब मुझे एक बात बताओ, does government plan to pay salary or is it the duty of government to pay salary? Does government plan to pay salary to its employees? Is payment of salary part of government's plan? Salary payment is a duty of the government. When somebody works for the government, आप IAS बन गए, क्या सरकार उस सैलरी को प्लान कर रही है? प्लान करने का मतलब, अगर प्लान कर रही है तो उसका मतलब यह भी कह सकती है कि हम सैलरी नहीं पे करेंगे. प्लान करते हो आप अपने एक्सपेंसेस, यू प्लान योर एक्सपेंसेस, बट इज इट पार्ट ऑफ द डॉक्यूमेंट ऑफ प्लान दैट यू प्रिपेयर? Document of plan that you prepare may have, let's say, a reference that since the salary component of our total expense is 50,000 rupees, therefore we are left with only 50,000 rupees to plan for remaining expense. आप ये कह सकते हो कि हमारे पास 1 लाख रुपए हैं और उसमें से 50,000 रुपए की हमको सैलरी पे करनी है और बचा हुआ 50,000 हम प्लान कर देंगे कैसे स्पेंड करना है. We'll plan to spend these 50,000 rupees and this is how we plan to spend. Payment of salaries, is it planned expense? No, it's not planned. I hope this distinction is clear, the use of the word plan. You don't plan, quote unquote, you don't plan to pay salaries. It is your duty to pay salary to your staff. You don't plan to pay salary to your staff, it is your duty. But in case such an expense can be shown as planned expense, then you will be able to show a bigger plan expense. plan कई बार आ गया है, इसीलिए मैं दोबारा से रिपीट करता हूं, प्लीज ध्यान देना आपका सब लोग. You do not plan to pay salaries, as in you do not decide whether you have to pay salary or not. There is no discretion involved there. It is your duty that you have to pay salaries. You plan for your expenses apart from or after paying salaries. You have got 1 lakh, you plan for the remaining 50,000 ki this is how this 50,000 will be spent. 50,000 तो ड्यूटी है, वो तो सैलरी कितना पे करना ही करना है. लेकिन अगर मैं बोलूं कि मेरा प्लान्ड एक्सपेंस 1 लाख है, अब उस 1 लाख में से 50,000 तो सैलरी ही है. लेकिन अगर मैंने बोला दैट माय प्लान्ड एक्सपेंस इज 1 लाख, नाउ I will receive good press that I have increased planned expense. But in reality, how much is the planned expense or the planned portion of expense? In reality, it is only 50,000. Government will try to inflate planned expenses over a period of time. Planned expense, which were synonymous with the developmental expenses, will now consist of so many maintenance expenses. Maintenance is duty, it's not part of your plan. Planned expenses will now become inflated, that it becomes difficult for you to see that how much of planned expense is developmental and how much is non-developmental. Non-developmental का मतलब समझ रहे हो? Non-development का मतलब ये नहीं कि वो खराब है. Non-developmental का मतलब ये है कि वो planned नहीं है. It is not for, let's say, construction of a school. आपने 40,000 करोड़ रुपए डेट, you spent 40,000 crore rupees this year for this literacy mission, but out of this 40,000 crore rupees, 38,000 crores was spent on paying salaries to paying salary to the staff or maintenance of schools. Only 5 schools were created this year, whereas you planned or you wanted to create, let's say, 1,000 schools this year. Is it developmental or non-developmental? Do you see higher expense or lower expense? You see a higher expense. So government will try to reclassify the non-developmental component of their expense as planned expense. Therefore, the plan non-plan classification will lose its relevance over a period of time. You will not be able to infer anything from plan non-plan classification कि plan में क्या है, ये चीज तो non-plan में होनी चाहिए थी. कोई scientific, financial reason नहीं है of something to go in plan, of something to go in non-plan. Revenue और capital में एक specific reason है. In revenue and capital, the reason is if it has a bearing on assets and liability, then capital. If not, then revenue. We may argue what is asset, what is not asset, but the definition is clear. One part, the starting point of definition is clear, that anything that has a bearing on assets and liability will go in capital, anything not will go in revenue. We may further clarify that what is an asset, what is not an asset. That is second thing. But here in plan, non-plan, it is not clear what goes in plan, what goes in non-plan. It becomes completely arbitrary, a discretionary exercise of the government where it tries to inflate planned expense and show that we are incurring more and more developmental expenses. Delhi government at present, for example, the present Delhi government says that we have spent 1,000 crores on control of pollution. If you look at that 1,000 crores, 900 crores will be spent on advertisements. 1,000 crores on spending controlling pollution looks good. Out of 1,000 crores, 900 crores on, I'm exaggerating, but you get the point. I'm certainly grossly exaggerating, but you get the point. 900 crores is spent on advertisements. Now you know that out of 1,000 crores, only 100 was actually spent on controlling pollution. Smog tower जो लगे हैं, उनकी total cost मान लो केवल 100 करोड़ रुपए है, versus 900 करोड़ रुपए तो आपका advertising expense है. सरकार बोलेगी हमने 1,000 करोड़ रुपए spend किया. Therefore, good press, government is able to communicate that we have spent 1,000 crores for quote unquote developmental purposes. Plan synonymous with the development. And therefore, what you will try to do is, you will try to reclassify all the non-development expense as part of plan so that you see more developmental expense. This exercise becomes arbitrary. Exercise becomes completely discretionary. There is no scientific basis to classify an expense as plan or non-plan. Hence, it will lose relevance. Rangarajan Committee in 2013, previous government, Rangarajan Committee in 2013 recommended in very strong words that plan non-plan classification needs to be done away with. Rangarajan, who had been one of the, who has been the products and one of the chairmen of Planning Commission at one point of time, Rangarajan himself recommended that plan non-plan classification needs to be done away with now. Why? Because it has lost all its relevance. There is complete arbitrariness, no scientific method to classify an expense as plan and non-plan. In 2016, 2016 में, recommendation 2013 में, in implementation 2016 में. In 2016, government did some budgetary reforms, and one of the budgetary reform was that government did away with plan non-plan classification. अब आपको बजट में प्लान नॉन प्लान क्लासिफिकेशन नहीं मिलती है. सरकार प्रेजेंट कर सकती है, ऐसी कोई बात नहीं है कि नहीं करेगी, कर सकती है प्रेजेंट, बट अब प्लान नॉन प्लान की कोई रेलेवेंस नहीं रह गई है. प्लान नॉन प्लान क्लासिफिकेशन हैज बीन डन अवे विद नाउ बिकॉज ऑफ ह्यूज अनसर्टेनिटी regarding which expense will be planned and which expense will be non-planned. Capital and revenue classification is more scientific, has an economic basis, as in anything that affects assets and liabilities is part of capital. If it's not, it's part of revenue. What is asset? That is clarified further. उसको बाद में क्लैरिफाई किया गया कि एसेट क्या है, लेकिन प्लान नॉन प्लान में आपका ऑब्जेक्टिव करप्ट हो जाता है. करप्ट मतलब objective becomes corrupted by your idea that plan is synonymous with development. Hence, let me show more plan, therefore it will be more development. I think that pollution example serves as a good example of what development is and what developmental is not. This is why plan non-plan classification was abandoned in 2016. Budgetary reforms of 2016, it was abandoned then. I hope this is clear to everybody. यहीं से हम आगे कंटिन्यू करेंगे नेक्स्ट क्लास में when we start a discussion with deficits. In next class we'll discuss deficits and we'll discuss different types of taxes. Different taxes जो हम डिस्कस करेंगे उसमें हमारी अगली क्लास जाएगी प्लस सम पार्ट ऑफ नेक्स्ट क्लास जाएगी. In the next class, I'm sorry I forgot to send these slides. आज स्लाइड सेंड कर दूंगा और आज रात तक या कल सुबह तक आपकी स्लाइड्स अपलोड हो जानी चाहिए. I'll also provide a handout of GST. GST का एक हैंडआउट प्रोवाइड करूंगा, वो हैंडआउट प्लीज पढ़ना. क्लास में आने से पहले GST का हैंडआउट पढ़ के आना. I have written that handout of GST. पूरा उसके अंदर मैंने एग्जांपल्स के साथ एक चीज एक्सप्लेन करी है. Please come to the class after having read that GST handout. It's of 5-6 pages, but it will greatly enhance your understanding of GST. It will make my task of teaching in the class easy. अगर आप पढ़ के आओगे और मैं आपको फिर उसके बाद पढ़ाऊंगा तो इट इज अ विन विन सिचुएशन फॉर बोथ ऑफ अस. अगर नहीं पढ़ के आओगे तो मैं काफी ट्राई करूंगा, फिर भी आपको हो सकता है समझ में ना आए. तो प्लीज पढ़ के आना. आई विल प्रोवाइड दैट हैंडआउट एज वेल एंड आई विल प्रोवाइड दी स्लाइड्स एज वेल टुडे. ठीक है, लेट मी सी. देयर आर 2 क्वेश्चंस, लेट मी आंसर दोस क्वेश्चंस. स्निग्धा, व्हाई इज रीपेमेंट ऑफ डेट कैपिटल एक्सपेंस एंड पेमेंट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट ऑन लायबिलिटी? ये तो मैंने बता दिया स्निग्धा. स्निग्धा ये तो आई हैव एक्सप्लेन. अभी किसी और ने सवाल पूछा था तो ये मैंने तब भी एक्सप्लेन कर दिया था. रीपेमेंट ऑफ डेट, यू रिड्यूस योर लायबिलिटी. पेमेंट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट, इंटरेस्ट इज पेड एज अ मैटर ऑफ ड्यूटी. सरकार को अपनी प्रतिष्ठा मेंटेन करनी है और उस पे से सरकार डिफॉल्ट नहीं कर सकती है. गवर्नमेंट कैनॉट डिफॉल्ट ऑन इट्स पेमेंट्स. इट इज वन ऑफ द सॉवरन फंक्शन ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट टू रीपे इंटरेस्ट. That is why interest payment is revenue. Principal payment is capital. For your information, even in balance of payment account, you borrow. Indian firm borrows from abroad. Reliance Industry ने JP Morgan से पैसा लिया अमेरिका में. Money comes to Reliance Industry. That is part of capital account transaction. It will be recorded as capital account transaction. रिलायंस इंडस्ट्री ने उसके ऊपर इंटरेस्ट पे किया. दैट इज पार्ट ऑफ करंट अकाउंट ट्रांजैक्शन. क्रिएट्स फ्यूचर लायबिलिटी वर्सेस डजंट क्रिएट. इज इट अ सेटल्ड ट्रांजैक्शन. फॉरेन इन्वेस्टर इन्वेस्ट्स मनी. अमेजॉन इन्वेस्ट्स $10 billion in India. Part of capital account. Inflow in our country, part of capital account. On that investment of $10 billion in India, Amazon earns $1 million every year and takes it out. Amazon ने earn किया $1 million. That $1 million that Amazon takes out as part of its profits is current account transaction. $10 billion capital account पे है, $1 million on this $10 billion which Amazon is earning is part of current account. Sombi, sir, increments in DA is part of plan or non-plan? यार अगर प्लान में लिखा होगा तो वो प्लान है, अगर प्लान में नहीं लिखा होगा तो नॉन प्लान है. If in government's plan it is written that we will increase dearness allowance of people of its employees, then it will be plan. Almost with certainty I can tell that no plan mentions dearness allowance expenses. I may be wrong, but I don't think so any plan mentions dearness allowance expense. Hence this is part of non-plan. This is salary component non-plan का ही part होता है. वो आप क्रिएटिव अकाउंटिंग करके उस सैलरी कंपोनेंट को यहां पे ले आते हो, जो मैंने आपको अभी एक्सप्लेन किया. क्रिएटिव अकाउंटिंग करके आप इस पार्ट को डीए को प्लान के अंदर ले आओगे, बट आइडियली इट इज नॉन प्लान. ठीक है, और यही इसी वजह से इस चीज को अबैंडन किया गया. निधि, the sudden expense by the government on emergency expense in case of disasters or pandemic are not mentioned in the budget or any plan. So are these expenses only from contingency fund or is there any space of these expenses under these terms? Sudden expenses such as COVID के जो expense है. Government spends money on sudden expenses, emergency expenses. These expenses cannot be planned for in advance. Number one. Still you keep some part of money as contingency expense, but कितना expense होगा वो आप पहले नहीं decide कर सकते हो. Such expenses are incurred on the go as and when they are incurred, but I hope you know this, permission from parliament is taken when such expenses are done. Permission can be taken from a back date. Expense की requirement आज है, कोविड का expense आज करना है, तो आप expense आज कर दोगे. प्लान नहीं किया था उसके बारे में, बजट का पार्ट नहीं था, बट यू विल डू दैट एक्सपेंस टुडे. ये पॉलिटी में आपने पढ़ा होगा. अप्रूवल कैसे करते हैं, मिसमैच, आई एम फॉरगेटिंग द टर्म दैट वी यूज इन पॉलिटी, डिफरेंट टाइप, ग्रांट्स पार्लियामेंट से जो ग्रांट लेते हो ना, अलग अलग टाइप के ग्रांट, एक्सपेंस कर दिया और उसके बाद अप्रूवल लिया. सो दिस इज पार्ट ऑफ दोज ग्रांट्स. अलग अलग ग्रांट्स हैं, सप्लीमेंट्री, कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री, कंटिजेंसी ग्रांट, आई एम फॉरगेटिंग ऑल दोज ग्रांट्स. तो आपने पढ़ा होगा शायद पॉलिटी में वो पार्ट. दिस इज दैट. Darshan sir, thoroughly enjoy. Acha, you have just one doubt. Thank you so much, Darshan. You have one doubt which you had only discussed few moments ago, whether the road made in XYZ village under PM grants Yojana will be capital or revenue. Darshan, this is, you can again, I'll not give the answer to this question. Number one, because even I am not certain. Number one is this. But at the same time, I would like to have a discussion on this. I am certain about those capital expenses. I also know मेरे को इसका आंसर पता है, लेकिन मैं चाहूंगा कि आप पहले इसके ऊपर डेलिब्रेट कर लो. हम नेक्स्ट क्लास में, क्लास जब शुरू होगी तब हम डिस्कस करेंगे वो जो क्वेश्चन मैंने आपको दिया है राफेल जेट का या फिर एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर का, कि क्या वो कैपिटल एक्सपेंस है या क्या वो रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंस है. वो क्वेश्चन हम डिस्कस करेंगे, उसके बाद आपको एक सवाल आसानी से आप इसका आंसर दे पाओगे. ठीक है, क्लियर? वील डिस्कस इट आफ्टर द क्लास, वील डिस्कस इन द बिगिनिंग ऑफ नेक्स्ट क्लास. ठीक है, चलो खत्म करते हैं आज की क्लास. फिर टेक केयर एवरीबॉडी, नेक्स्ट क्लास में मिलेंगे. और कोई सवाल तो नहीं है? सिमिलर क्लासेस हैं, नेक्स्ट क्लास में आई डिस्कस. चौबे जी, आदित्य जी, आपका क्लास नेक्स्ट क्लास में डिस्कस कर लेंगे, नेपाल वाला जो गवर्नमेंट का एक्सपेंस है. ठीक है, अंशुल, ह्यूमन कैपिटल वाला पार्ट, ऑल दीज पार्ट्स नाउ आई थिंक दीज आर इजी टू आंसर क्वेश्चंस. स्टिल राफेल वाला एग्जांपल से ये सब क्लियर हो जाएगा आपको. ठीक है, चलो, टेक केयर एवरीबॉडी, लेट्स मीट इन द नेक्स्ट क्लास व्हेनेवर दैट इज शेड्यूल्ड. आई थिंक इट शुड बी ऑन मंडे. मंडे को मिलते हैं. गुड बाय, टाटा, गुड नाइट.